Reddit, have you ever been part of a significant moment in someone's life and not found out until much later? I dated a 28-year-old girl when I was 22. She was divorced with a 6-year-old. I was obviously too young to deal with a 6-year-old, but tried to hang out with the kid as much as I could. His mom was a bit technically challenged, so I set up their PC, brought him some of my games, upgraded their PC from time to time with spare parts from my PC, etc. We finally broke up, and I thought that was that. 10 years later, I see her on Facebook, do the friend thing, and she asks if she can call me. Sure, why not? We speak for a bit, and she asks if her son can speak to me. He's now 16 and has a few things to say to me. Me and the son speak for about an hour in which he profusely thanks me for the times I spent with him and his PC games. Because of me, he has gotten completely into building his own PCs and building the PCs of his friends at school. He loves gaming and says it reminds him of me. Never felt so honored and so horrified at the same time. Directionless, immature, 22-year-old me did something to change the course of someone's life. Made me think twice when dealing with people after that. Edit. Holy crap, people. As a lifelong hospitality worker, going out of my way for people is pretty ingrained in my personality, and I regularly forget what an impact just being nice to people can have. On one particular night we had a reservation for a couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, and they let us know in advance that the wife was in a wheelchair. No biggie, I arranged a table that was easy to access and equally close to entrance/bathroom, and removed her chair so that when they arrived they didn't have to go over these things. It can be embarrassing to have people make a fuss over you and your condition, so doing these things in advance helps. It turns out the wife wasn't just in a wheelchair, she was quadriplegic. All she could move was her face, even her neck was in a brace. Her husband was incredible, patient, attentive, loving. At the beginning of the meal he ordered for her, he cut her food and fed her before he touched his plate. When I would come by the table to see how they were doing, I tried to include her in the conversation, ask her questions, but her husband would always answer for her. It was like we were chatting through a translator. After their mains, I brought over the dessert menu and was talking them through the available options when I heard the wife murmur. Clearly she was struggling to speak, so I leaned in and she asked me if we had any cheese. I explained to her the available selection, and when I brought it over gave a story about each of the cheeses in turn. It feels strange to be discussing these little details because they are just run-of-the-mill things. The point is, at the end of the night they left, smiling, and both thanked me for a lovely night. A couple of weeks later my manager gave me a letter the husband had written to me. Not unusual, customers often write in afterwards to say thank you, but I choked up reading it. Apparently the wife had been quadriplegic for a couple of decades by that point, and for nearly that long they had spent their time alone, just the two of them, rarely leaving the house. The occasions when they did they had been treated as a nuisance by the general public, and it was so disillusioning to them that they became reclusive. The wife especially, who had not said a word to anyone outside family or doctors in over 10 years. He closed the letter by thanking me for their humanizing experience, a truly special anniversary gift, and that they now looked forward to enjoying many more nights like that one, after having missed out on so many. When I was in middle school we had a big end of school dance. This was during the time of silk shirts for the guys and puffy sleeves for the girls, about mid-90s. During said dance, a girl who I knew, but was not into, asked me to dance. Because my mom raised me right, I knew what kind of courage it took for her to do that, especially at that awkward age. We danced, probably to Boys Second Men or something, and that was that. No biggie in my mind. About 20 years later on Facebook, she hits me with this. So I had this random memory of you yesterday, and felt like I should share it for some crazy reason. Please don't think I'm nuts. For some reason the memory of you dancing with me at the 8th grade dance entered my brain. I'm sure it's because Mother's Day is approaching. At that time was when my mom was really sick, and it was obvious that she wouldn't be here much longer. The day after the dance my family and I went to visit her in the hospital. When it was just the two of us in her room she asked me if I danced with someone. When I told her that I danced with you, she was so happy. She knew how big of a crush I had on you in middle school. As I thought about it, I realized that it was probably the last happy memory I had with her. It was soon after that she became sicker and died a few weeks later. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you for giving that to me. Mind blown. Thanks for teaching me unconditional respect, Mom. A friend of mine who moved away a couple of years ago actually messaged me on Facebook the other day about how I saved her life. She explained that she was anorexic in middle school when we were good friends, and there was one particular day that changed her outlook on life. It was teriyaki chicken day, best faking lunch of the year, and she said she wasn't going to have any, wasn't hungry. I refused to take that answer because holy fuck, teriyaki chicken. I pulled her up to the line and made her eat her chicken, rice, fortune cookie and drink her chocolate milk. She told me that she went home that day and cried, finally realizing that someone did care. She said, "You probably saved my life that day. I just wanted to let you know how you changed me that day. I think about it every time I feel down." I cried so hard, tearing up a bit now remembering her message. I had no idea. I'm so glad 11-year-old me did that, because she is a beautiful, wonderful person, studying biology at a great school, living life to its fullest now. She's a Redditor too, so Ali, if you're reading this, I'm so glad you told me, and I hope you're doing well. 3. Edit. There are so many messages in my inbox right now, it's not funny. Most of them are her dare, get laid, but I'm here to tell you we are both girls and we are getting to know each other again, trying to be friends, like we were then. Others are saying this is the wrong way to handle eating disorders. I agree. I didn't know at the time she was anorexic. I just wanted her to have the only school lunch that was actually good. Many of you thanked me, which was great. I'm glad I shared this story and regret that I can't reply to all of you. There's just too many messages now. Greater than sign. Thanks guys. Here is the story of the man who saved my life without ever knowing it. I was 22. Just recently kicked out of college, moved back in with my parents, and was going to the local community college while working as a clerk at the Chicago Board of Trade. Now, my CBOT job gave me access to tons of great stuff. Money for school, connections in Chicago, but mostly drugs. Every drug I ever wanted, the best prices, and the best quality. I took great advantage of this. To say I was depressed would be putting it mildly. I hated myself. I hated everything about me and what I had become. Let me take you through a typical day. Wake up at 3 AM and take the train to work. Eat painkillers and a Red Bull for breakfast. Get yelled at on the trading floor until 5 to 6 PM. Eat more painkillers. Go to school from 7 to 11 PM. Eat more painkillers. Go home, play video games, and eat more painkillers. Repeat. Repeat this every faking day until the weekend came. The weekends weren't much different. I would simply add cocaine into the mix and stay up all night downing painkillers and snorting at minimum a gram or two of coke by myself. I was miserable. Add my habitual cutting routine in the mix and I can easily say this was the lowest point in my life. I thought about suicide almost every day and really can't explain how much I hated being me. Then one day I bumped into a friend from high school. We literally walked into each other while I was going from work to class. We were never great friends before, but he was a great guy always. We ended up grabbing coffee and agreed to see a movie the next week. At this point I had not hung out with anyone I would consider a friend in about 8 months. I was super excited. A friend, someone to talk to. We ended up having a great bromance night out, movie and hot wings. It was awesome. I was actually happy. From then on every week we would either see or rent a movie. I can't really explain why, but this changed me. I started caring about myself again. I started trying harder in school. I slowed and eventually stopped using drugs, and I didn't feel the need to cut anymore. To this day he has no idea that he literally saved my life. I have never really explained to anyone the massive impact he had on my life, and putting it all down like this is really causing me to tear up. TLDR, a movie a week with a friend from my past turned my life around. Helped me kick drugs and get off suicide watch. My girlfriend at the time, who was in school across the country, was starting to spend a lot of time with this, admittedly nice, guy. I felt like I saw the writing on the wall and broke up with her. Years later I found out they were happily married and very successful. So, I like to think, mostly for my own ego's sake, that I made that possible. Edit. First, thanks for all the karma. Was nice telling a story that I don't speak of too often to such a warm audience. 3. You read it. Second, please don't make me out to be some hero. I was just doing what I felt was best for her and me at the time. Our relationship was extremely strained due to the distance and diverging lifestyles, and I'm not sure how much it would have lasted. I do know that she was extremely emotionally reliant on me. Despite my jealousy, I was happy to see her offload some emotional burdens to someone besides me. I was really buckling under that pressure after 2 years. It wasn't like we had a perfect relationship and I was handing her over to some new guy out of some ridiculous selfless act. When I ended it, it was because I knew I had the choice of either prolonging what was probably inevitable and make us both endure many more months, maybe years, of pain, or end it hoping that the new guy would be able to be there for her. I was very happy to learn years later that he had been there for her. I wouldn't have ended the relationship if I didn't know this guy was a growing part of her life. I also had spoken to one of her closest friends out there and made him swear he'd take care of her. So, I felt like she was in good hands. Anyway, thanks for listening. I was 13, had just started high school, and was still very naive. I had just recently begun being invited to hang out with the cool kids after school thanks to an upperclassman I'd befriended in my biology class. On the day my health class learned all about cancer, I went out with my new cool friends to sit around in a parking lot and eat ice cream. When my friend lit up a cigarette in front of me, I burst into tears and said I didn't want him to die, and didn't he ever think about how his family would feel. He stubbed out the cigarette to stop me crying, and instead we took a walk across a construction site, because that's so much safer than smoking. A month later, I noticed I hadn't seen him in a week. I shrugged it off, thinking he was sick or his parents took him on a trip. When 2 weeks passed without any sign of him, I started getting worried and asked around. Rumors were he was in an institution. I called his parents for his contact info and asked his parents to send him a CD he'd asked to borrow from me. They said they'd give it to him, but sorry he wasn't allowed to talk on the phone or anything. Then they thanked me profusely for being such a good friend. Okay, it's just a CD, but you're welcome. After the 3rd week of his absence, he called me to let me know he was home and would I like to hang out with him at the coolest local hangout after school. His parents picked me up and dropped us off. He thanked me for the CD and we talked about music. Then after an awkward silence, he looked at me really seriously and said, "No, I really need to thank you. You saved my life." I was completely confused. It was just a CD. Apparently the reason he was gone for 3 weeks was because he'd been checked into rehab. He'd been doing cocaine and heroin. Where the hell does a 15-year-old get this stuff? And the sight of my innocent little heart shedding tears over his impending death by cigarette made him rethink how his lifestyle might affect his friends and family. He started going to nap, going to school more often, all that jazz, though he didn't quit smoking. Years later, after we'd both drifted apart and graduated high school, I ran into him outside a restaurant. He looked overjoyed to see me and took me over to his table to introduce me to his fiancée. He told her that I'd saved his life and if it hadn't been for me, he wouldn't be the man he was today. It was super embarrassing, but I was glad he'd been able to turn his life around. Every once in a while, I still hear from him. He has 2 kids with his wife, and he let me know recently that he'd finally quit smoking. TLDR, I cried, loaned someone a CD, and saved his life. I have never posted before, usually just browse during the workday and upvote things that interest me, but this thread has me wanting to share. My mother was hospitalized prior to my birth due to complications with her diabetes. Her roommate, I'll call her R, another diabetic, and she became best friends. R's daughter is 2 weeks younger than I am, but to this day, I'm 32. We tell people we are wombats. R's 2 daughters and my brother and I are lifelong friends. We had mothers who were often in and out of hospitals during our lifetimes, so each time one went in it was just normal to think she'd be back home soon. When we were 18 I had used my dad's car to go to work, but got a phone call saying my was in the hospital and I need to return right away with the car, so my parents could get over there. I actually quit that job, because they gave me a hard time, and rushed my parents to the hospital. Her entire family was in a grieving room and I didn't see what the big deal was. Everyone was quiet and sad and dummy. I just didn't get why. No one explained the severity of the situation to me. Since the hospital was down the street from the high school I had just graduated from, I knew the neighborhood and suggested that all the kids, my generation, go for a walk over to McDonald's and grab some food. I was being my silly self and joking around, trying to make everyone lighten up. My wombat wouldn't smile. She just couldn't. I was wearing a hemp necklace with beaded letters that said smile. Since she wouldn't, I took the necklace off and put it on her. When we got back to the hospital we were told to go in and say our goodbyes. I was stunned. Had no idea. Their mother had passed away and I felt so dumb. For years I felt like a complete asshole, thinking everything was okay and acting like an idiot while their mother was dying. Fast forward about 5 years. The two sisters and I go out for a girls only dinner on Valentine's Day. We get to talking and that day in the hospital comes up. I tearfully tell them how I have been feeling like shit for my behavior and apologize profusely. The older sister stops me and says, "What are you talking about? We were so grateful to you for keeping us from losing ourselves in misery that day." Whoa. I was miserable inside for my actions all those years and they saw it as me cheering them up and being a great friend. In theater, during my senior year of high school, there was a really quiet freshman boy. Kinda awkward, but really nice. Obviously had some bad memories from middle school. One day we are all changing in the locker room, joking with each other. It's theater, so the jokes are all very gay. He stops the conversation at one point, after making a couple of jokes with us, and say, "I just want you guys to know, I'm not gay. Like, I'm joking. Not gay. I don't want you to get the wrong idea." And I know, right away, that's from the douches in middle school who had given him a bad time. So me, being a totally tubular dude, say, "Dude, we know. It's all jokes here. No one here is going to call you gay. We are all friends, man." I pointed to one of my fellow actors, a sophomore I was best buds with, and said, "Friend, I loves yo dick." He swooned. We all laughed. The freshman seemed a little more comfortable. Later in the year, right when apps were ripping me a new one, the theater was having its acting showcase. I had already quit the theater to focus on schoolwork, but I managed to get to the showcase to rep my friends. The very last piece was fronted by that freshman, but all the theater kids were in it. It was this big showcase of, basically, "Fuck you, bullies. I'm awesome." It was, admittedly, a little cheesy, but it was genuine, and I loved it. After everything was over, I was helping out with striking the sets. Can't get out of that sheet even now, haha, and he came up to me and asks how I liked his piece. I told him, and he seemed super happy. He told me that he wrote it with me in mind. When I told him that we are all friends in the theater, it made him realize how friends actually act. So, some offhand remark one made to make a freshman feel more comfortable turned him onto a life of theater and a newfound confidence. Fuck yes. So I was drafted into the Vietnam War. Now, like most of the 20-somethings of the time, I was conflicted. I felt like America shouldn't have gone to war, but at the same time I had an obligation to my country, so I sucked it up and went. I was sick with the flu during most of basic training, so I couldn't fire a rifle, which made me the laughing stock of my camp. They ended up making me file all of the paperwork that came in. One day I was told that I had to move some files to another camp, but the fighting between my camp and the other camp had been finished the night before, so I figured it would be an easy mission. As I took my first step onto the once battlefield, I noticed a man with an obviously wounded leg. Not having any first aid supplies, I figured I'd use the sum of the files to soak the blood, and I tied them up with my shirt. I continued on with what files I had, and when I got there the commanding officer was so mad that I got discharged and sent back home. Now 20-something years later, on Veterans Day weekend, my son, his friend, his friend's grandfather, and I went from our place of residence down to DC to visit the memorials, as the grandfather and I had both served. His grandfather was a WWII hero who tricked the Nazis into eating bad meat and getting sick, which blew a wide hole through their defenses. After my son heard his story and mine, he was convinced that I wasn't honorable and was majorly disappointed in me. When we arrived at the Vietnam Memorial, I heard a man call out my name. He introduced himself as the man whose life I had saved. He said if it wasn't for me using the files to suppress the bleeding, he would have bled out and died. The doctors who examined him marveled at how he was still alive. Because of my actions, a fellow human being was allowed to live and parent 2 kids. TL, DNR, Gerald learned that his father was a war hero after all. Before I begin, I'd like to say that turquoise is my favorite color. This is relevant later, I swear. Back in 2004, I used to participate heavily on an obscure internet forum. The community was small and extremely tight-knit. The result was that I made several friends with which I keep in contact today. My good friend from the forum, Bo, who had less than stellar luck with the ladies, decided to venture forth into the rudimentary online dating processes that existed at the time. Now, keep in mind that this was back when internet dating was not a regular thing. Mention of the subject sent eyebrows flying from those less technologically inclined. Unfazed by warnings of crazes and scam artists, Bo had signed up on one of the nameless many sites of the era and set to work. He soon had found 2 matches that he deemed acceptable. They were both attractive, intelligent, and, most importantly, in his locale. However, Bo had a conundrum. Which of these ladies to pursue? This is where I factored into the equation. One fateful evening, my friend instant messaged me over the glory that was a name direct connection. 2 photos of rather attractive ladies, replete with names. Which one do you think is better looking? He posited to my 2004 self. Now, I'm not one to judge, but Bo certainly had a type. Both pictures were of short blondes that could have been twins, for all I knew. The only major difference between the 2 photos was the clothing each girl wore. The first, Jane, was clad in a turquoise ensemble. The other, Sheila, was stuffed in a red dress. Knowing nothing of women's fashion and unable to discern whether the 2 pictures were even of different people, I went with my gut. Definitely Jane. I like turquoise. What of it? Anyways, Bo set up a date with Jane later that night, based on my sage advice. Now, this was right around the time when the forum began to dissolve due to a dispute amongst the site admins, something about hosting fees. Posts trickled to a stop over a few weeks as the site was plagued with downtime, which culminated in a permanent 404 about a month later. Bo never got back on AIM to chat after that, busy with whatever internet acquaintances do when they're not on the internet. Fast forward to 2010, Bo finds me on Facebook and adds me as a friend. His profile picture is of him smiling next to his wife, Jane, holding a newborn. TLDR, my favorite color makes babies. I was a lacrosse goalie in high school. Mid-season, we were 0-4 in intra-league games. Our next game was against the #1 ranked team in the state at that point. They were undefeated and had just beaten a major rival who were the perennial state champs. Their best player was a senior midfielder who was the son of the head coach. We beat them 5-4 on their field. I played a hell of a game. Due to a previously rescheduled game due to rain, we then played them again later that week at home. Normally games were spaced out a couple weeks between schools, and shut them out, 7-0. Only shootout I ever had. After their 2 losses to us, their season was totally derailed. They lost their next 2 games, costing them the league championship. A month or so later, my friend/teammate was having a graduation party. I couldn't go, but my mom went, because our parents were friendly. She's chatting with a middle-aged guy, and it turns out he's the coach of the team we had played against. When they realized their sons had played against each other, he asks my mom what position I played. She told him I was the goalie, and he apparently responded, "Your son made my son cry." TLDR, ruined a jock's senior year in front of his head coach father, and made him cry without ever really meeting him. In college I worked a retail job in the local mall. I'm a very forward and talkative girl, so I did well. When I didn't get enough hours at my job, the store across the hall offered me a job. I met this 16-year-old kid, I was 20, who was my match when it comes to being talkative. We got along really well, and I ended up hanging out with him a few times. I thought his was odd because he was so young, but we got along instantly. It turns out he was really depressed, to the point of attempting suicide. He had 4 siblings and his mom supported them on a youth minister's salary. They sometimes couldn't even afford heat. He had dropped out of high school because of social anxiety and got his JED quite early. Several times I talked to him for hours on the phone, calming him down. I gave him a place to go instead of getting into trouble with his whole kid friends, and showed him that there were plenty of good things in life. Around the time I graduated, he pulled me aside and told me that I changed his life. He told me that he was a different person because I paid attention to him and made sure he knew he had support whenever he needed it. He's about to be 19 and is a manager at a store and saved enough money to buy a car and contribute towards rent for his family. I'm incredibly proud of him. TLDR gave a 16-year-old depressed kid some attention and changed his life. Edit, paid. 2 years ago, I was very active in a channel. We all got really close, met up a few times, had each other's phone numbers etc. One night, a guy starts ming me about how he feels really shitty, considering suicide, needs someone to talk to. He calls, and we talk about how he was molested as a child. He is really drunk, cries, asks for advice. I tell him to go home to his parents and just spill it out. Don't know why I told him this. In retrospect I don't think I should have, but the call ended when his taxi pulled up to their house. I move on from the a few months later. We never spoke of it. A month ago I was at a house party, and a guy calls me over by my old nickname. It's the guy. He hugs me and tells me that I was the best help he could have gotten, that his parents helped him through the rough night, and that my advice and listening meant so much to him. That night had made a huge difference in his life, to the better. So random, I didn't know what to say. I hugged back and told him I was happy that I could be there for him. We partied on, never speaking about it again. So weird that you can make such an impact in a stranger's life with just some words. I got my first job when I was 18 years old at a Hollywood video shitty corporation which I can't begin to explain my joy in its going out of business the week after I quit. My first day I meet my manager whom had no bottom teeth and was fairly wired, so I assumed she was a drug addict and never wanted to associate with her. I came to like this person, at least as friends at work, and I learned we both had a lot in common, as far as being abused parentless kids and all the shit we got ourselves into. Of course me being male I myself wasn't a teen mom. I finally left for college a year later, and I promised I'd call her. I called every day. I found out her husband was beating her, cheating on her, alcoholic as whole. I told her to come visit. There weren't dorm policies at the party school I was attending. I weighed 300+ pounds at the time, so I wasn't trying to be a home wrecker or expecting any kind of romantic involvement. I was just trying to help a friend out. We had a blast, went to the beach, the zoo, aquarium, just spending time as tourists. We shared my twin bed, a challenge in itself. Like I said, I was obese. After a week I took her home. I found out she divorced her whole husband and got her daughter out of there, which I was happy to hear. I unfortunately, or so I thought at the time, had found myself in love with this girl, so to prevent any chance of letting more love slip past me, I started working out and lost 120 lbs. This didn't bode well for my studies though, and I was forced to drop out. I moved back, and we started hanging out, me not telling her how I feel. I decided to join the army because I was out of ideas, so I took my best friend, her, out to lunch to tell her as I was excited and scored a cryptolinguist job which they said was rare. Bullshit, any computer geek can do this job, haha. Upon telling her that I was glad I got to escape and there was nothing for me in that town, she looked sad and pulled out her phone, looked and said she had to go. I didn't know what was wrong, so I let her be. I continued working out. She saw me less and less, always busy, until the night before I shipped out. I called her to come see me and she did. Finally I decided it didn't matter because I was leaving anyway, so I grabbed her and kissed her. She didn't act surprised. In fact, she kissed me back and started crying. What took you so long, asshole? I'll always remember that. We are married now, and we are talking about me adopting her daughter. Who knows if she would stayed getting beat on by that man. Who knows if I would have gotten in shape and found myself in a job I absolutely love. Thanks for listening. I was reading all of these great stories and decided to make a post about my story. No more lurking for me. Hopefully there isn't too much getting downvoted to hell. Okay, so this is not exactly what you are looking for, but I was there for a large turning point in someone's life. So my buddy asked out this extremely hot girl at his work and she agreed. Well, a month into the relationship he invites me to go with him to a movie. Third wheel, yes, but I never feel like a third wheel with them. Anyways, we get to the movies and we are waiting for her to show up, and he turns to me. Buddy, dude, I need you to fuck my girlfriend. Me, laughs, what? Why? Buddy, she is driving me crazy. She is all over me, and I need to break up with her. Me, so just break up with her. Buddy, nah man. I think if she cheats on me, and already has you, that will make it easier. I have been busting my buddy's chops about how hot his girlfriend is forever, and then when they break up I'm totally going out with her. Jokingly, I would never do that. Me, you know I want a man, but I dunno. Buddy, dude, she thinks you are totally hot. Even when you are not around she talks about you sometimes. I won't get angry or weird or anything. Do whatever you want to her, even tonight here at the movie. Make a move when I get up. Me, laughs, OMG dude. Maybe, but I don't think so. She is way faking hot, but I don't think so. Okay, nothing happened that night, but he wanted me to go to his job and ask her out and sleep with her and all that jazz. I never did. 2 years later he asked her to marry him. 5 years later I have never seen a happier couple. She was hot enough that despite my pretty damned good morals I totally would have done what my friend requested, but I was too worried about our friendship and other things, so I did not. Again, not that I'm the type of guy to do that. But there I was at a turning point of what I thought was the end of a relationship, and 7 years later they are still together. I'm a bit late so this will probably get buried, but when I was deployed in Baghdad, I worked an overpass shift. In the middle of the night, I would go to the dining facility to grab food. Most nights I would go right before they closed, around 1 AM, and sit down with a few of the TCNs, third country nationals, who worked in the dining hall. They were mostly from India and Sri Lanka. Anyway, every night I would sit with them, and they would talk to me in English. I would teach them new words and phrases, and explain basic things to them. When it came time to leave, I had 2 boys from Sri Lanka, they were about 20, who had stuck around, sitting with me every night, while I ate for a year. Their English had greatly improved. I bought them both Sinhalese to English dictionaries as parting gifts. They were very happy. I just enjoyed their company and learning about Sri Lanka, and they taught me a little of their language as well. It was an enjoyable experience for me. Fast forward 5 years, and one of them contacts me on Facebook. After he left Iraq, he moved back to Sri Lanka, and the English he picked up while working with me got him a job at a big named resort on a tourist beach in a major city there. He is now considered rich by most standards in that country, and has a beautiful family. He greatly attributes this to our late night chats in Baghdad. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to, but I'm so happy that I was able to improve his life. The other one contacted me as well, and he still works for the US military, but he is in Afghanistan now. I'm going to twist this around and talk about a guy that played a significant part in my life and may not know. I was going to this magnet middle school way far away from my house and in a pretty rough area. Fights were very common, and I got my ass beat fairly regularly, as I was a pretty dorky kid. Being white, I was a minority in that school. I met Eric that year, and we got along pretty well. He was on the basketball team, and pretty damn good, and as such established himself pretty well with all the kids in the school. At one point, he basically told folks that I was not to be messed with, and a lot of my problems disappeared. Beyond that, he invited me to go to his church, and there I met lifelong friends and people that changed the person I was turning into and made me better. I'm not religious and never really was, but this place was home for me. We would end up going to the same college, became roommates, sang in an a cappella group. He was my best man, and a hilarious guy to be around. We've dropped out of touch, now that we each have our own families and careers. I'm not sure how I would have turned out if I hadn't met Eric, but I can say for damn sure that I'm glad I did. No idea if he's a redditor or not, but if you are reading this, Eric, and you will know if it's you, thanks a ton. Well, not sure how much of this was my part and how much was societal pressure, but when I was overseas I met this Japanese girl who was kind of broken, to say the least. She had lived a tough life. She had been fighting and won against leukemia until she was 15. Her only family left was a dad dying of lung cancer, and she had gotten divorced from a very abusive ex, which, in Japan, was still something shameful. When I first met her, she was done with men. Basically, she was content to live the rest of her life by herself. Well, we had a whirlwind romance in the short time I was visiting, and even though she was shy at first, she started to open up to me. I couldn't stay, however. This was basically my vacation time, and try as I might I needed to go back home. So we promised to keep in touch. I told her I'd always be there for her, and we tried to keep in contact. But life moves on, and soon we kind of forgot about each other. Recently, though, I saw on her Facebook that she got engaged, and she seemed to be very happy with the guy. She also sent me a message through FB that makes me believe that I helped her. It was only one word, arigato, but I understood what it meant. This is the inverse of the prompt. Something that someone did for me that really changed my life. A little background. My parents are happily divorced. I've lived full time with my mother in Indiana mostly, and spent the summers with my father in Iowa. Those Iowa summers were really lonely. All the other kids were too preoccupied with their own friends to even consider an outsider, and only being there for a few weeks certainly didn't give me much of an incentive to make friends. So, I'd fool around in the garage or my dad's shop, a shitty little outbuilding stashed with all kinds of forgotten materials and random tools during the day, and after dinner I'd play video games all night like Tales of Symphonia, Animal Crossing, Splinter Cell, of course, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. But, being a kid, especially an adolescent, can be hard. If you're 13 to 14, spending the summer in almost total isolation can be brutal. Enter my Uncle Richard. Richard was my dad's half-brother. My grandfather had a couple, consecutive, not concurrent, wives, and Richard was his youngest son from his second marriage. Richard's dad died when he was 11, so he had to enter adolescence with that crippling absence. He was severely depressed and variously medicated and handed from therapist to therapist. Add in a controlling, neurotic mother. Whenever he did something that made her angry, she'd say, "Richard, that really breaks my heart. Why are you hurting me?" Richard's young life wasn't very good. So, I'm 13, he's 22. He shows up one day during a blistering, lonely Iowa summer, out of nowhere. I don't know him that well, but he seems pretty cool. Together, we play hours of Tekken, eat at rallies, variously crank and wrench on a couple of old cars, listen to White Zombie, Powerman 5000, rap, and various other hard rockin' bands. Watch lots of anime. Also, he taught me how to drive. He worked 2 jobs and went to school. He could been out courting girls, drinking with his buddies, or doing other things. Instead, he reached out to me to make sure that there would be something good about my childhood unlike his. He was a welder, which he hated, but he had wanted a job in computers and was even taking classes for that. As it turns out, Richard was a great guy. He was always taking me along to do favors for his friends. Some of these people took advantage of his good nature, but that just made him work all the harder for him. Richard went especially out of his way to be the best to people who did not deserve it. So, fast forward to my sophomore year of high school, I move full time to Iowa and quickly fall into a really cool, respectful, responsible bunch of kids. I'm easily the most reckless one of the bunch. I skip on my homework, finish it in class real quick, swear openly in front of teachers, and encourage the occasional drink or past curfew romp. However, I stayed in the top 20 and performed well enough in school. In general, I think I'm pretty hot sheet. Richard starts spending a lot of time with my parents, which is cool. I like to have him around, but then he starts bringing this woman around. All I will say of her is that she is not in Richard's league. He's 25 to 26 now. He's lost touch with, or his other friends have married, and he's lonely. He settles for her. She's a bit like his mother, domineering, always telling him what to do. But, of course, Richard busts his ass for her. So, I kind of distance myself from Richard. Now that he's married, and married this woman in particular, he's no longer cool. I'm friendly, sure, but he mostly gets attitude and condescension from me. He even moved to town and lived up the street. I helped him move in, but that was the only time I ever voluntarily went to see him. I was busy with my friends, anyway. I was, however, not too busy or cool for him to fix my car when it broke down, to tow me out a ditch, or give me directions in Des Moines. I took advantage for him for favors when I needed him, and ignored him, or made him feel bad otherwise. Fast forward again a few years. This summer, I've just finished my freshman year of college, and, apart from sparse, troubling Facebook conversations with Richard, he mostly said how bad of shape he was in, that he was depressed, on this medication, or that I hadn't really talked to him. Really, I had forgotten about him. He and his wife were sleeping in separate beds. He was trying to reconnect with old friends, old flames on Facebook and otherwise. His wife, unemployed, let her nephew, his girlfriend, and a few of their friends move in. Richard was the only one with any sort of serious job. If you had asked me a few months ago, I would have said he was a loser. If he was shitty about his situation, he should have made better choices. He should have left his wife, kicked those kids out. If Richard was miserable, it was his own fault. But, I didn't hardly think that, like I said, almost completely forgotten. On June 14, 2012, he shot himself in the head. The night before, his wife had discovered an apparently suggestive conversation he was having with another woman. He took off, angry, and as he left, his wife called out, "You're really breaking my heart, Richard." I don't know what he was thinking, or how he felt. I hope he felt like he was done doing the world favors. I hope he felt like he was withdrawing from a cruel, selfish, unjust world. That he was done with all these people sucking off of him, his wife, his housemates, me. But, that's what I want to think to make myself feel better, because that way, he died the good guy in his own mind, and he had some dignity, some peace. But he probably felt like a no good cheater. He probably felt worthless, and that he had no good to do anymore. I bet he felt horrible, sick, and sad. The time he spent with me when I was a kid was really important to my development, but he knew he was doing that. That was on purpose. I don't think I was on his mind at all when he was thinking about killing. He didn't leave a note or reach out to anyone. His abrupt, sudden, disruptive suicide has changed me for the rest of my life. Whenever I have the decision to be distant, comfortable, hold someone at arm's length, or listen to them, hear them, help them, I think about Richard. I think about how hard he worked for other people. What a tragedy it was that something inside him kept him from saying no, that some part of him let him be used, taken advantage of, and ultimately drained completely. I'm not perfect. I don't always help everyone, but I don't look down on anyone now, especially if I don't understand their whole situation. Your love, in measures however small, could save someone's life. My uncle, my big brother, my friend. Was it my love that could have saved him? Was it a tiny gesture of affection, of gratitude, of random kindness that could have changed everything? Either way, I did nothing to help him, and if what he did was a murder in any sense, I'm a culprit too. I know it hasn't been long, but I think about this every day. My sister has a story that fits this formula. My mom's best friend, let's call her Cheryl, recently passed away at a way too young age after a long battle with cancer. At the wake, there were around 5 separate areas of photo collages of Cheryl with various family members. A lot of them were of her and her 3 kids. However, one random picture was the centerpiece on a collage. It was of Cheryl holding my little sister when she was a baby. I thought it was weird, since this was the only picture with a non-family member, and it was featured so prominently. A few weeks after the funeral, I asked my mom about the picture. My mom then told me the story of the picture. How my mom and Cheryl had followed Cheryl's then husband to the marina, where he was meeting the woman he was cheating on Cheryl with. Cheryl was incredibly distraught and heartbroken. My mom took Cheryl to a party on a nearby beach that some neighbors were throwing. Cheryl didn't say a word at the party and was clearly still thinking about the father of her children cheating on her with another woman. My mom handed my little sister to Cheryl the very same moment when the picture was taken. When she was holding my sister, that Cheryl said out loud that she was going to divorce her husband. It was only 25 years later, less than a month after Cheryl had died, that we found out that holding my sister gave Cheryl the courage to divorce her douchebag husband. New Year's Day I got a phone call from a number one didn't recognize. Normally I decline such calls, but since it was a holiday, I figured it probably wasn't a telemarketer and answered. It was a guy I went to high school with, and he had been my first boyfriend and first kiss. We hadn't talked in 10 years. He had gotten my number from a mutual friend, and he said he wanted to tell me that I was one of the few genuinely nice people he knew and that, even though he was a dick in high school and wasn't always the greatest guy to be around, he still cared for me because I was always kind to him. Sensing the finality in his voice, I asked if something was wrong. He had just been separated from the Marine Corps for personality disorder after he sought help for some mental health issues he was having in Afghanistan. It sounded a lot like PTSD to me, nightmares, survivor guilt, etc. He said he was staying with a Marine buddy in Northern California with no job, no money, and a lot of mental issues. I talked to him for nearly 3 hours, and by the end of the call he didn't sound nearly as dejected. Just before we hung up, I heard a metallic clicking sound and asked what it was. He said he was taking the bullets out of the pistol he'd been holding to his chin the whole time, and that he was going to take my advice and start tomorrow as a new chapter in his life. It's 8 months later now, and he still calls now and then to let me know how he's doing. He's got a good job, going to individual as well as group counseling, and got a pilot's license. I'm a teacher. One year in my sociology class we were talking about family. A student stayed after and told me she was terrified because her brother was coming home from college. Of course I asked her why, and she very reticently gave me an abbreviated version of the sexual abuse and physical violence that she suffered through him. I told her that I was required by law to report this. She begged me not to. I did anyway. I went home and begged my ex-husband to let us allow her to stay with us for a few weeks. No go. I had given the student my cell. I consistently talked to her every day, letting her know I cared, and I was there for her. She never spoke of the abuse again. Fast forward 4 years, she's graduating with a double major, crim justice and sociology. She contacted me and told me that I was the memory she held onto in her darkest moments because I was the first adult who believed her and tried to do something. Because of me, she is going into family law to try to help other abused children. Whoa. And I always cursed myself for not doing more. Teaching gets you a ton of these stories. I got to be the first adult kids came out to. I got to be the first person who convinced a kid he was smart and special. And this is why you teach. I'm commenting sort of late on this, so it will probably be buried. In elementary school, I had just entered 1st grade. There was a program at my school that was sort of like mentoring where on occasion, the 5th graders would be paired up with us to help us out in school. Not to brag, but I was quite a bit advanced relative to my school's curriculum at the time. Datation parenting, P, and totally excelled through all the schoolwork that was handed to me. Well, in the mentoring program, I was paired with a certain 5th grader named Joe who I knew would be trouble the moment I saw him. He was quite a bit bigger and meaner looking than the other kids, and I overheard the teachers talking about how he was a troublemaker and never really paid attention in class, and hoped that this program would give him the drive to take charge in school. Well, when I heard this, I was pretty pissed. I didn't like dealing with conflict, so I asked my teacher to change partners, to which she said no, and that she thought I could work well with this guy. Yeah, right. Anyways, all the groups were given these times tables sheets that had 200 simple multiplication problems on them, and whichever team finished first would get a prize from the prize basket. I saw the Pokemon cards in there, so I was prepared to destroy this task. I looked over at Jose, who obviously had no interest in participating, and sort of lounged there. I told him, "You don't have to do anything, man. We'll win those prizes." The teacher said start, and I was off. I could tell at this point that Jose was sort of interested after I mentioned that we would win, because he was staring directly at me while doing those problems. I managed to finish the worksheet by a huge margin and stood up. The teacher checked and all the questions were right, so Jose and I both earned prizes. While walking up to get my Pokemon cards, Jose turned me around. I thought he was going to tell me to give him the cards I earned. Instead, he asked me how in the world I did what I just did. I basically said it's simple when you know a few tricks. So, we sat back down, and I explained to him all the simple multiplication tricks I had learned, and thought nothing of it. Fast forward to today, I'm currently a sophomore in college. I was going to grab a cup of coffee when I accidentally bumped into a person in line in front of me. He definitely looked familiar, but I couldn't put a name on the face. A couple minutes later, the barista called for a Jose, and I just knew this was that kid from elementary school. I asked him what his full name was just to be sure, and it definitely was him. We reconnected really quickly over a cup of coffee. He told me that ever since that day, he was so interested in math that he started to focus a lot in school. He started earning really high marks and got into the college I was attending. He had just recently graduated with a math major for his undergrad and was now studying for a CS Masters. I had no idea that little first grade me ended up driving this kid to work hard in school. I've talked more with him since that meeting, and we are now pretty good friends. TLDR, helped a troublemaker find the drive to start succeeding in school. In 2007 I was finishing my deployment in Afghanistan, and about a month from coming home my vehicle was struck by an IED, improvised explosive device. I woke up a little over a month later. The blast broke my pelvis, my legs, pulverized my left heel, and in Germany it was decided that I would be placed in a chemical coma for my own good. I didn't know about any of this. I had a severe brain injury, so I remember being in the truck talking to my team leader about going home and then waking in a hospital. What I did not really know until recently were all the lives my injury affected. My friends in the army who dropped everything to help my wife and kids get to Walter Reed, the EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, Memorial Fund helped fly my parents and 3 siblings to Walter Reed so they would be there when I came out of the coma. There is one person whose life this accident affected more than anyone. When we were injured, the guy behind me lost both legs and the gunner in the turret lost 3 fingers on his left hand. I was told later they called for the medical helicopter to come get the injured, but it was in Salerno and would take too long to come get us. I was dying, and they told Salerno if I had to wait on them I would die. A national pilot flying a medical helicopter with flight medics on board was already in the area going to my FOB, forward operating base, to pick up a psychiatrist or something. He requested permission to divert and pick us up. His request was denied and was told to continue mission to FOB Orgoon. He told them to go fuck themselves, then flew out to come get us. He saved my life. I died twice more and spent the next several months in an intensive care polytrauma unit. Everyone told me that if it was not for him there is no doubt I would be dead. The bird from Salerno would not have made it in time. That pilot was grounded for the rest of his deployment. I don't know his name, where he is from, or why he did what he did. He saved my life, allowed my wife to have her husband back, and my daughters have their father thanks to this man, whose name I don't know, but who I owe my life to. I probably ruined his military career. While I'm sorry for that, I'm grateful for the life he gave me back, and I wish I could thank him properly. Lot of good stories on here so far, and this will most likely get buried. Back in the summer of 2009, I was an intern in PA. Myself and 2 others designed and painted a mural on the side of a historical building with the local community's help. During the day, we had hours where anybody could come by and paint whatever part of the mural we were working on at the time. Mostly we got a bunch of kids. Kids can't paint 4 sheet. At night, the 3 of us would spend most of our time cleaning up and correcting whatever the kids couldn't comprehend. These nighttime painting sessions were also open to the public, but nobody came. Except for one guy. He had to have been in his late 60s or early 70s. I don't even know his name. We called him Edge as he would come in most every night in his beat up Oldsmobile and smooth out the ragged lines kids can't follow. The man was good too. I gave him some of my better brushes, so he wouldn't have to take from the community bucket. Some nights it would be just him and me and the radio. We would paint for hours without talking. I liked Edge. I thanked him every time he came. Then one day he thanked me. He told me how his daughter and her whole young family were brutally raped, murdered and then set on fire. He came to paint as a form of therapy, and that it was genuinely helping. It gave him a little hope and happiness, because otherwise he would be sitting at home in front of the TV thinking about what a faked up world it is. I will never forget the sadness in his eyes and shoulders. TLDR, kids can't paint. Edge came and saved the day. Late to the party. I'm a bit of an amateur magician, doing close-up kinda of stuff, and several years ago I was volunteering in a children's hospital, going to the various rooms and asking the nurses which kids I could see. Many of these kids were really sick, cancer, etc., and the patients and often their families had to spend many weeks there. This day was special, as all of the kids who could make it were coming to a party. I was kind of the greeter, and I would kneel down and talk to the incoming kids and do a magic trick for them. The best trick I ever found was also the easiest and the fastest, where I show them a card, put it in their hand, and after they shake it and say the magic word, the card has magically become a different one, often the number of their age. All was going pretty good. The kids loved that the magic happens in their hands, and they are the magicians, not me. This young boy who was maybe 7 years old comes in wearing a hospital gown, with his mom walking a few steps behind him. I kneel down, do the magic, the card changes in his hand, and like many of the other kids, he gets a great big smile, show his mom the magic that he did, and tries shaking the card a second time to see if it changes again. It doesn't. The boy moves on into the party. I see his mom start crying behind him, trying to hide her tears. Not sure what was happening. Seems likely she was having a hard day. I move on to the next child. After the party is wrapping up, the mom stops me on my way out, thanks me, and tells me why she had burst into tears. That was the first time her son had smiled in the 2 months he had been at the hospital. I still get a bit emotional thinking about it. 15 seconds of my time, and I was able to bring a bit of sunshine into his life that had been missing. I had the opportunity to tell someone the effect they had on me that they never realized. Ever since I was a little kid, I'd wanted to become a field biologist, studying awesome animals all over the world. School came easily for me, and by the time I was a junior in high school, I had run completely out of biology classes offered at my school. So, I took calculus, physics, etc. I graduated from high school with some really good scholarships and went off to college, still heading towards biology, but with less certainty. After 2 years, I was well into the program, but didn't really enjoy it. I was having second thoughts. That summer, I had an internship working at an environmental consulting firm in Florida. While I enjoyed the people I worked with, the work was painfully dull. I was damn near a telemarketer, except people had signed a contract stating they would talk to me. Then, at the end of the summer, I went to visit some old friends of the family that lived nearby. I stayed with them for 3 days, and really got to know them much better as people, not just some friends of my parents'. Now, these were a wealthy couple. One of them was among the people who started one of the main cell phone providers. Now, my family for generations is almost all teachers, which means they haven't really had a hell of a lot of money, but they're happy. In my experience up to this point, it seemed like the only way to be truly successful in a business sense was to be a miserable asshole. I didn't want to be a miserable asshole. I wanted to be happy. So, it kind of curbed my ambition. I additionally played it very safe, always having a backup plan and building a safety net. This couple showed me 2 things. First, it's possible to be ridiculously wealthy and incredibly kind, generous. They donated a hospital wing, loving, and all around friendly. Second, if you don't swing for the fences, you really won't hit a home run, and it's alright to strike out once in a while. So, with this knowledge floating around my head, Combined with my less than pleasant internship experience, I coasted on towards my biology degree because I'd already registered for classes. Then the next term I continued my trend because it was easier. However, I kept thinking, this isn't what I want to do. Spring term registration came up, and I was staring at the computer and just said, fuck it, what engineering courses can I get into? After 3 years of college, I changed my major, changed my school, changed my city, left my circle of friends, and took off in a completely different direction. Now, 6 or so years later, I have a degree in mechanical engineering, live in Hawaii a few blocks off the beach, and make pretty decent money. I sent that couple a letter at my graduation, just telling them how much those few days changed my life. They called my parents crying, called me, showed it to everyone. It meant an amazing amount to them. If you get the chance, just let people know. TLDR, changed my entire direction in life after staying with a happy old couple, then sent them a letter about it. Tears and stuff. I have always had a rather different point of view. I have something called Asperger's syndrome, although we didn't know it at the time this happened. I had just moved from Texas to Wisconsin. When I was 3, my parents enrolled me in a Montessori preschool when they heard that it was the best in the area. The teachers could tell that there was something wrong with me, but they never said anything about it. I was always bluntly honest. I made sure that everyone was treated fairly. I didn't really have friends. I didn't really understand emotions, and I obsessed about specific subjects. The teachers loved me. They always have, when I was a kid. No idea why. It turns out that they loved my different point of view. They loved that someone dared to be different like that. I guess most of you know that most 3 to 5-year-olds can be little bastards. I really wasn't. There was one teacher that decided to start volunteering and being a better person because of me. To stop judging and lying. She actually told my mom that I'm the one who made her do that. She is actually very happy with her life now. My mom told me about this only recently. I was wondering why one of my old preschool teachers kept messaging me on Facebook. My life was changed by an offhand comment my sister made. I was 15 and on the off end of depression that almost killed me. As such, I had missed that vital period of time where people learn how to dress themselves nicely and develop a positive self-image. I never really thought of how I looked. I was a fleshy blob that walked around and ate things and wore baggy sweatshirts and ugly jeans and hadn't cut my hair for years. I invested zero effort into my looks. My looks were a non-entity. I thought I was ugly. So when my sister commented to our stepmother offhandedly, does she even know she has such a great figure? I was blown away. That night I actually looked at myself in the mirror and was shocked to see that I had hit puberty pretty nicely. I was curvy. It rocked my entire world. Suddenly I had the right to think of myself as a good-looking human being. I was pretty. I may have cried. Since then I cut off my hair and started to wear clothes that aren't bag lady quality. I dare say I'm very nice to look at. Even beyond the pretty, I walk with a swagger, and I have so much confidence in myself. And if my sister hadn't made that little comment behind my back that I happened to overhear, I would still be awkward and dangerously introverted. I have been the new kid at schools one too many times. After sitting alone for weeks at the beginning of each new school year, it changed my perspective a lot. I now have a die-hard philosophy about making new people feel welcome. Even if the new kid doesn't end up being your new best friend, at least they didn't feel hated and isolated when they were new. Senior year of high school was the first time in over 7 years that I ended up starting the school year at the same school I had ended with that spring. During orientation, I didn't recognize one of the girls who walked up to my booth. I asked her if she was new, and she said yes, she had just moved to CA from the south. I gave her my phone number, got hers, and called her asking her to hang out before school started. She said yes, and immediately we became friends. Not close since we didn't have much in common, but still someone she could talk to. She sat with me and my friends for a few weeks, and eventually found her own niche at school. 3 years later, she messaged me on FB letting me know how big of an impact it had made, since her transition had been so hard. Made me cry. TLDR. Saw new girl at school at orientation. Asked her to hung out for a bit, but didn't really end up being good friends, but messaged me and told me that my actions had a big effect on her. 5 years ago, I was going through some pretty rough family problems. I had never told anyone about my abusive father. I kept it all inside to build up. I didn't really have any friends, so I spent much of my time online. I met this amazing boy, and it is very easy to say he turned into my best friend. We talked daily for 2 years. He had went through basically the same situation as I was going through, and I opened up to him. One day I was feeling at my lowest and planned on committing suicide that night. I went online to talk to this boy for the last time and thank him for being there for me. I didn't even have to say anything. He knew what was up, and for the first time in my life, someone let me know I had worth and that I was special. He helped me through the hardest time in my life and made me promise I would never even think of anything like that again, because there are people that care about me. 2 days later, I got an email from his cousin. I found out this boy had died in a car accident. A drunk driver slammed into his car and killed him instantly. I was crushed. But more importantly, his cousin, who I was also very close with, also was devastated. This boy and his cousin were extremely close and the best of friends. Once he died, we got closer, and I found out she was going through the same thing as me also. We cried to each other for weeks, comforting each other as much as we could. She was really down, and I could tell, so I used all the advice my friend told me to try and help her and cheer her up. When much time went by, I decided it was time to tell her about how her cousin saved my life. As soon as I told her, she went quiet and told me she knows exactly how that feels, because I had saved her life. She was at such a low point in her life, after she had lost her cousin, and not one other person in the world was there for her. That was honestly the best, most touching moment of my life. I do not talk to this girl much anymore, but I will always remember her, and always remember the amazing boy that did so much for so many people. TLDR, best friend died in car accident days after saving my life. In return I saved his cousin's life. When I was working for an auditing firm, I was working in a hospital auditing their supplies for their year-end taxes. One of the areas I needed to audit was a psych ward, both inpatient and outpatient. While in the outpatient area, I noticed a very pretty, very sad girl. She was dressed in hospital PJs and a white terry cloth robe, and thick bandages over both her wrists. She asked me what I was doing counting all the things, so I told her. We chatted about inconsequential things, while I was working for about half an hour. Once I finished auditing the area I wished her and the others there a good day, but as I passed her I put my hand on her shoulder. She looked up at me, and I told her it may not seem like it right now, but it does get better. 2 years later she is introduced to us all as our newest employee. She came up to me and said, "I remember you. You saved my life." She told me that she was fully intending on killing herself when she was released from the hospital, cutting up instead of a cross, but my casual comment made her stop and think that if a totally random stranger could care about her, maybe others could as well. She started talking with her family and friends and realized the depth of love that they had for her, and she realized that maybe there was something there for her to love about herself. She got therapy, learned to accept herself, and the last I heard she was married with a child and a second on the way, and was deliriously happy. It still amazes me how much an offhand comment helped. When I was 25, I was walking down the road and heard the sound of screeching tires. I looked up the hill and saw that a man in a motorized wheelchair had been struck by a car, and that the wheelchair had fell over to its side and skidded down the hill about 10 feet. I immediately ran up the hill to the man in the chair and was the first one on the scene to render assistance. I'm not a paramedic or EMT, but I had a lot of first responder training between the Boy Scouts and the Air Force, so I immediately tried to keep him immobile, holding his head in position. He had tipped over, and he had a seat belt in the chair, which was still fastened. He kept trying to unbuckle that, and I stopped him, telling him to please wait until the ambulance was there. About 5 minutes later, I was relieved by a paramedic. I gave my information to the police as a witness and first responder, and left. 3 months later I was served with a subpoena to appear in court. The man who hit the guy in the wheelchair was fighting a ticket for striking the man in the wheelchair, and his lawyer wanted me as a witness. I went in and met the guy in the wheelchair. He was in bad shape, but he immediately recognized me. "Hey," he said, "you're the guy who saved my life." I was somewhat stunned by this and asked for more information. Apparently, when he was struck, his spleen was ruptured. The seatbelt was the only thing that was putting pressure on his abdomen, keeping the blood loss to a minimum. He said that after the paramedics pulled him out of the chair, he lost over 3 pints of blood in the 5-minute ride over to the hospital. He was in the ICU for a week and the hospital for a month. If I had let him unbuckle the belt while he lay there, he would have bled out and died right in front of me before the paramedics arrived. The court case went for the wheelchair guy, even though the other lawyer tried some slimy tactics. It was good to see that justice was done that day. I never saw the wheelchair guy again. Okay, this one's a little weird, but I suppose it applies. I was walking home from school one day. I was about 14 or 15, minding my own business and whatnot. I was your standard, awkward, clinically depressed teenage girl when this dude comes up behind me, grabs my ass, and whispers some creepy shit in my ear. What the serious fuck? I immediately, without thinking about it, turn around and start screaming at him. "You faking asshole, who the hell do you think you are? Did I say you could touch me, you sick faking pig? Get the hell away from me before I kick your faking ass. I will tear your balls off and choke you with them, you piece of shit." He walked briskly across the street and didn't look back. Yeah, you better faking run. I went home and cried because, as brave as I'd appeared, being treated like a piece of meat is pretty humiliating and really scary. Cut to a year later, a guy comes up to me on the same street and says, excuse me, miss." I turn around, don't recognize him at all, and ask what's up. "I don't know if you remember me, but I was the guy who, sexually assaulted you last year." My jaw just dropped, and I didn't say anything. He then proceeded to tell me how horrified he was at his own behavior, how that's what he'd seen his friends do, and he genuinely thought that was what you were supposed to do to a girl you liked. He knew that wasn't an excuse, and that it didn't make it better, but he just wanted to say that he was sorry for what he'd done. That my reaction had completely changed his life and his concept of how you're supposed to treat people. It was really awkward and uncomfortable, but looking back, I'm glad that he learned from it, and that he'll never do it to another girl again. TLDR taught a guy that sexual assault is not a good thing. I've been lurking on Reddit for a couple of months now. I'm still a little confused about how it/y'all work, but this is the first thing that's prompted me to get an account and reply. Here's mine. When I was in high school, perhaps 10th grade or so, we had a new kid, Chad, show up in the middle of the year. Chad was a little different, but very kind. My first memory of him is in gym. We played dodgeball. It was his first day and he didn't have gym clothes, so he played in jeans and cowboy boots. He played the most hilariously intense and exaggerated game of dodgeball. Fearless he was. I guess he was trying to impress us. It was a few weeks later, and I still hadn't really talked to Chad much. Not many of us had. I was driving home on the highway and I saw Chad walking down the road. I pulled over on the shoulder, driving slowly beside him, asked him why he was walking. He told me that he didn't drive to school that day just because he felt like walking. Turns out he lives about halfway to my house, which is 8 miles out of town. I tell him to get in, and I'll take him home. He said no thanks. I told him, dude, get in, I really don't mind. Nah, thanks though. Dude, seriously, you have like 3 miles to walk in those damn cowboy boots. Get in. I'm not leaving till you do. Alright. So, Chad got in, and I took him home. It was a bit out of my way, just by a mile or two, but it gave me a chance to get to know him a little bit. I dropped him off and told him to let me know if he needs a ride. I started to talk to him more, as did others, and Chad started to come out of his shell a little bit. A few weeks later Chad took me aside to tell me thanks for giving him a ride. He didn't leave his car at home that morning because he just felt like walking. He left his car at home that morning because he planned, on his walk home after school, to commit suicide. When I stopped to pick him that day, he was just waiting for a semi to come along to hop in front of. He didn't want to jump in front of a car or small truck and hurt somebody. Chad ended up becoming very well liked due to his uniqueness. He wasn't the most sophisticated guy around, but he was hilarious in his own way, and he ended up making plenty of friends and being well liked. The story doesn't stop completely there, but this is long enough already. That's my significant moment. My dad and I used to read a lot when I was younger. It's probably the reason that I'm such a voracious reader now, and has probably played a large part in my academic success. He'd read a chapter of a book during his lunch break at work, while I would do the same at school, and then we would talk about the chapter at home. Soon, I would read more and more of the book as I got better and faster at reading, and he would match my pace. Soon, I was reading The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings at 7, my dad's all-time favorite books, because they kept him company every winter break he spent getting his PhD, and couldn't afford flying home to India in the late 70s and early 80s. I would struggle with the flowery prose and highlight the words I didn't understand, and he would help me out when we got home. Once the Harry Potter books came out, I got better and better at reading and comprehension and was far above my grade level. When I was in the 5th grade, this practice had long since stopped. My dad had too much work to read during his break, and I was more interested in learning science and math from him anyway, but I kept reading larger and larger books at a faster and faster pace. By this point, I think the 3rd Harry Potter book, The Prisoner of Azkaban, had just come out, and at least in my neighborhood, reading was still a nerdy thing to do. I had friends, so that wasn't the issue, but I never had anyone besides teachers to talk with books about. There was a kid in my class who I think had learning disabilities, but at the very least he was behind in his studies, reading especially. It didn't help that he was mousy in appearance and had thick glasses. He told me he had grown interested in the Harry Potter books after seeing me bring them in every day, among the other books I read, of the first month of school, and I was happy because I finally had someone I could talk to about books. The next day I lent the first one to him. I don't think I really knew at the time that he was behind in his reading as I didn't interact with him much, but I essentially put in place the same system my dad had used to get me reading. He would read us some during our breaks, and then we would talk about it later in the day, or while waiting for the bus. He would then read at home, and then we would talk the next morning. I told him to use a dictionary as well, because that's what I did when I started reading long books. He read about a chapter a day for the first week, but then improved to 2 a day, then 3. I think he finished the first books in 2.5 weeks, starting essentially with a deficiency in reading comprehension, and being roughly adequate at the end by my 5th grade estimation. I lent him the 2nd and 3rd books as well, and he increased his pace as the school year went along. I lent him other books as we waited for the 4th book to come out, and he got faster and better at reading with each book. When The Goblet of Fire came out, we both bought it and finished it in a week, talking about it every break period we had. By this point, I think a few people had joined us, but I don't remember them that well. At the end of the year, we had a year-end party with the other classes and the parents were invited. My dad came, and his mom did as well. I think his mom asked our teacher who had helped her son get better at reading, because I remember him gesturing at me and my dad. She came over and talked with my dad for a few minutes while I went around with my friends, but my dad called my name and I went over. My dad was beaming with pride as his mom thanked me profusely for getting her son to read, and I think probably getting him out of his shell as well. This went on for several minutes. The whole time, the other kid was standing next to his mom, thanking me as well. I think this was when I realized that he hadn't been that good at reading, or school in general. I was just looking for someone to talk with about books outside the classroom. He gave me a gift card to Barnes & Noble, and my dad took me to buy a few books. As soon as we left, he invited me to his birthday party over the summer, and there were quite a few kids there from our class that I hadn't noticed he had become friends with over the course of the year. His dad took me aside and thanked me as well, and I gave him a set of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I saw him again once or twice, but I started at a private school in 6th grade. I haven't seen him again, and I don't know what he's doing, but I like to think that he's still reading. TLDR, in 5th grade, I helped a kid start reading using the same system my dad used on me a few years earlier. By the end of the year he had gone from lagging behind in reading and comprehension to being above his grade in ability. The only story I know that pertains to this involves my mother and her sister. When my mother was 46 she had a stroke and lost the use of the right side of her body. She went through months of physical therapy and was only able to regain slight use of her right leg, but enough to walk. She tells me that this is the lowest point in her life. To set it up, she was divorced, not because of the stroke, happened 3 years prior, living alone, taking handfuls of pills per day to survive. I cannot describe how she must have felt. So one day, while I'm with my dad, she pours all of her meds onto the table and pours a glass of water. She writes me, 11 years old, my sister, 26, and my father a note, and leaves a check to me for all she owns. She grabbed a handful of pills and thought about her sister living 250 miles away in TN. Then the phone rang. It was her sister asking my mom to come to Tennessee to live with her, so she didn't have to be alone. She inadvertently stopped my mom from overdosing on meds by calling her for the first time in a month. She still doesn't know this. As of now, my mom is living on her own again near my sister in Georgia and spends the weekends with her amazing grandchildren. She has dialysis 3 times a week due to a factor unrelated to the stroke. She isn't living wonderful, but she's happy. She just recently told me this story. I'm 15 now. TLDR, talk to your family and friends. You never know when a nice offer or a simple conversation will change their lives. Thanks Aunt Tommy. One of my best friends of the last half decade is a girl that I worked with for a few months, with whom I bonded and became great friends with over that time and beyond. Admittedly, I had a ginormous crush on her from day one. Tangent, ginormous is a real word. Chrome didn't put a red squiggly beneath it. Weird. And much of our early friendship was predicated on that crush and us being flirtatious while not really being dangerous, since she had a douchebag of a boyfriend and made it pretty clear that she only wanted to be friends. We just had rather sexual senses of humor. That aside, she went through some rough times that following summer which involved the on again off again ending of that relationship, along with some other really heavy stuff she had to deal with. Since she lives in the next town over, about 15 miles away, much of our daily talking would be done online via Facebook/MSN Messenger. She had a lot of rough nights, and I helped talk her through most of them that year. Come to her birthday party towards the end of that summer, a big gathering of drunken kids at a bonfire out on a friend's farm. At one point, she and I are off to the side talking, a little inebriated, and she confesses to me that I saved her life one of those nights when we were talking on MSN. That she had a bottle of whatever pills she had there and was on the verge of just downing them, but didn't because I was there talking to her and helping her through whatever was going on that night. I don't know if she remembers confessing that to me, but I'll never forget it. And from then on, I vow to always be the person who can be there for my friends when they need someone, because you just never know what kind of influence you can have on a person just by being there for them. I was about 15 and used to ICQ it, Google it beaches, and tried to talk to as many girls as I could. And I was fairly successful, but back in those days most internet girls were hideous. The cute ones were actually meeting people I suppose. But anyways, I've had a streak with depressing 14 to 15 year olds and was starting to get fed up with them. So along comes another 15-year-old girl and she's looking for me to be sympathetic and whatever. But by now I've had with these emo beaches, although emo didn't exist back then. So I harshly tell her that whatever shit she's going through I'm not gonna listen to it, I'm not gonna try and make it any better. She needs to sort it out herself and deal with it and stop being such a bussy. She goes berserker mad at me fuck it. I tell her to sort out her life and stop pestering me because I really don't care, no one on the internet does. Time flies and about a year later she contacts me. She asks me if I remember her and what I said to her. Nope. I remember her. We actually had been chatting for a while before our internet yelled at her, but had no clue what I had said. Well, then she proceeds to tell me that her father used to physically beat her brothers and verbally abuse the rest of the family and had done so her entire life. And for the last years she had been using the internet to seek comfort from strangers. That is, until she met me. Apparently she had gotten so mad at me that she sought out actual help, and now the family were receiving help from the government and her life had never been better. So she just wanted to profusely thank me for pushing her into action. I've never told this story before, come think of it. Never talked to the girl since either. Oh well, hope she'd sorted itself out for her. Not nearly as heartwarming as most of these stories, but I gave a young guitar player some advice that has stuck with him for the past 15 years. He was playing with his new band at a bar. They did a couple of originals, but mostly cover band bar music stuff. They had just hired him, so on some of the songs he had to sort of wing it. Still, the guy was, and is still, good. He nailed all of the correct riffs, chords, solos, etc. Also, he was a good singer on leads and on harmonies. The kind of guy you want to hire for your band if you were looking for a guitarist. The only bad thing I noticed about him was that he would turn his volume down when he had to improvise. See, he liked to learn solos and play them perfectly, either his own solo or someone else's, if repeating a famous solo was appropriate. Improvising, however, terrified him. I pulled him aside during a break, complimented him, and told him that I noticed that he backed off when he had to improvise. He said that he was afraid that he'd play something that sucked. My response to him was, hey man, if you're gonna suck, suck out loud. Give the audience your best rock star face to let them know that you played what you played on purpose. Then do the same thing again, just to make sure they get the message that you know what you're doing and they don't. The only way you'll stop being tentative is to throw yourself out there, remember your mistakes, and never make that same mistake again. You'll make different mistakes, but you'll remember them, and you'll be a better improviser because you hung yourself out there. Suck out loud. A guy with his kind of talent should never be afraid to fuck up a solo. Everybody does it when they are learning, and the experience makes you better. I moved to a different city shortly after that, so I didn't see the guy. So anyway, I moved back to my original area a couple of years ago and decided to go to a bar to see some band I've never heard of. Wouldn't you know it, but this guy is the lead guitarist and lead singer, and he tore the joint up. He sees me and comes over after their set, gives me a hug, and says, if you're going to suck. To which I replied, suck out loud. He tells me that it was the best advice anyone had ever given him. So I admitted that the same advice was given to me by one of my former college professors. At any rate, that guy kicks, as when he's improvising now. Edit, I made a typo or 3. Lurker here, with a throwaway, although I might be late to the party. I was born with a relatively benign, for first world country me, that is, birth defect, Hirschsprungs. The long and short of it was that part of my lower intestine pretty much didn't work. It wasn't really life-threatening as far as I know, but my poor, first-time parents were unragged with the stress. The first year of my life involved colostomy bags, and once I was old enough, I went in for surgery again, to remove the non-working bits of colon, put the working bits back together, and sew me up. I was talking by this point in time, probably close to 1.5-ish years, and my parents explained what was going on as accurately as possible without making it scary. Q maybe a year later, my family was visiting extended family. My mother's aunt was having a tough time, since her husband was terminally ill. Both of them were usually charismatic people, but the toll of the illness was weighing on them as he got weaker. My mother brought little 2-year-old me over to the hospital gurney in the living room that he was living on. This is Uncle Buddy, little own time. He's got a boo-boo. I corked my little head, gave him a good look over first, before lifting up my shirt to show off my surgery-scarred stomach, saying cheerfully, I've got a boo-boo too. They tell me that was the most they heard him laugh in months. I have no memory of the event, since I was much too young, but my family still likes to talk about the time that a little sick kid cheered up a dying man. I used to work in a coffee shop in Amsterdam. It goes without saying I sold weed. It was a small coffee shop owned by 3 brothers, and I was left in charge of pretty much managing the shop, dealing with the customers, and making sure the shop made its profits, as long as I didn't go too wild with my ideas. Then one night this guy walks in, seemed a bit confused, weird in a way, but he was still fairly well mannered. He bought his weed, bought a cup of tea, sat himself down at a table, and started talking up. It was a small coffee shop, and I had the habit of making a chat with the customers, especially the ones sitting alone, so they'd have a good experience coming to our shop. So I started a conversation with the guy. Somehow he seemed cynical and pessimistic about life, and that things weren't worth shit and whatnot, but I didn't let that get me down. I was high as fuck, and was interested in why he felt like that. I stayed optimistic, trying to give him a counter perspective on things. He didn't tell me anything personal, but I stayed optimistic, started just listening to him as well as he carried on. Eventually late at night he went away, and I forgot about the thing. A few days later he walks in completely lively and awake, and as he sees me his first response is, "Are you? I've been trying to catch you here for days. I just wanted to give you this, and thank you," and he gives me €100. Completely surprised as to why he would give me this, I asked him why and what for. He told me how his wife had left him, and he felt nothing was worth it anymore as he figured he couldn't see his kid anymore. Then he proceeds to tell me that the one night I spent talking to him, listening to him, and somehow staying positive about everything he had mentioned, had inspired him to hold on, and he said that he had planned to commit suicide that night, and thanks to me, he changed his mind. So as he finished the story I can't help but be shocked at the whole thing. He refused to take the money back, thanked me again and left. I never saw him again after that. A few years ago, my mom told me that her masseuse, Jessica, had gone to high school with me. I did indeed have a friend named Jessica in high school, so I didn't think too much of it. Over the course of a few weeks my mom often mentioned how much Jessica liked me and respected me, and what a big impact I'd had on her. This was sweet, but kind of confusing to me, because as far as I could remember Jessica and I had never really had any meaningful interactions. Our friendship had been typical shallow teen stuff. One day I come to the house while my mom is getting a massage. She calls me into the room and is so excited for me to see Jessica. The masseuse turns around and I don't recognize her at all. She was definitely not the Jessica I was thinking of, and if we went to high school together I didn't remember her. I didn't want to make her feel bad or anything, so I hugged her and asked her how she's been. She said she's been doing great, and it's all because of me, so she really wants to thank me. At this point, I'm like, question mark? It turns out that my sophomore year in high school, we had Spanish class together a few days before I tested out of it. I was really into romance novels back then, and apparently one of the days we were in class together I finished reading one and started offering it around to people. No one would take it, but I caught Jessica's eye and said, "Here, you should read this. I think you'd really like it." Which was bullshit, obviously, since I didn't know her at all. She took it, and I never thought anything of it. According to her, that one moment changed her life, because she'd never bothered to read for pleasure before. She was a slow reader, and doing very poorly in school, and just had no motivation to get better. But since I told her I thought she'd like the book, she read it, and it was so good she developed a lifelong love of reading. Her grades improved, and she ended up training to be a massage therapist, which requires a lot of study of anatomy and of course a lot of reading. I still didn't remember any of this, but I hugged her again anyway. TLDR, gave a trashy romance novel to some random classmate, ignited a passion for reading. Don't remember doing this. Here's one for us guys. My buddy reminded me of this a long time after I'd forgotten about it, then it came flooding back. A chick from the office I was talking to at a work night out confessed that she liked my friend, who had been present, but had left early. The thing is, he had told me that he liked her, but had found her quiet. When I told her that, she said that it was because she'd been nervous when speaking with him. I thought that they needed another chance to break the ice, so I drunkenly asked her if she wanted to join me for a quick beer at a pub near my friend's place and give his door a knock, as it would give them both another chance to talk. She said yes, and we got a cab. When we reached my buddy's house we got out of the cab, but I quietly asked the driver to wait. We went up to my buddy's door and rang his buzzer. When he opened it his face looked like Christmas had come early. I quickly said that the chick and I had been on our way to a nearby bar and had decided to stop at his place on the way, but that I'd received a phone call and had to split. The chick seemed embarrassed, but happy about my lie, and I left them to it, apologizing for having to bail so suddenly. I got back into the taxi and went to another buddy's place, head held high, like a prince among men. The chick's tigs were like soccer balls, and my buddy said later that their fling was one of the best he'd ever had. TLDR, I'm the anti-cork blocker. My weekday uniform is a business suit, and at weekends it's shirt and jeans, so it makes me hard to spot. Some say I don't exist, but I'm out there, and I've always got your back. Every summer my brother, sister and I go visit our grandparents in Oklahoma. Our grandmother works at a summer childcare facility, so she would take us to work with her. My brother and sister, 7 and 5, were perfectly fine playing with the other kids, but since I'm 14 and the limit was 12, I was considered a teacher by the kids. There was this pair of siblings, a brother and a sister, who I was especially nice to because they seemed shy. The little boy was 6 and his name was Nathan. He was autistic, but he still loved to play with me. We would color pictures and play cars and blocks, and he wasn't a very good speaker, so he would say I do love you, and I would say I love you too. His sister McKaylee was 7, and she would cling to me anywhere we went. She would sit by me on the bus, and we would play Barbies and watch movies together. The time came when we had to leave, and our last 2 days there were sad. I came in and was immediately looking for McKaylee and Nathan, but they weren't there, and they weren't there the next day either. On the car drive home, 8 hours, my grandma mentioned them and told me how their dad was a drunk and their mom was put in jail for murder. She said they clung to me because they needed a motherly figure and I seemed to give them what they needed. When we got home I sat and thought about it for a good half hour and started crying. That was my grandmother's last summer working there, and I never got to say goodbye to McKaylee or Nathan. Jumped onto this thread late. Well. When I was 5, I started kindergarten. Now, I was a pretty outgoing kid to say the least, the kind that was friends with everyone, knew everyone's name. Whenever we'd get put into groups, it seemed that I was always grouped with this one girl, Maggie. She was very shy and didn't seem to have a lot of friends. Out of my entire class, she was one of the few I didn't really know. Slowly I got to know her and realized how nice and polite she was. At Christmas time, we had a gift swap, and while everyone else got cool 90s toys, I got Maggie's gift. And it was a book. I smiled because my mother had always told me to appreciate what I get, even if I didn't necessarily like it. But I was disappointed. All I could think of was, a book. Who wants a book for Christmas? Maggie and I remained friends in class, and I was one of the few that actually talked to her. Come to find out, she was a huge fan of reading, and years down the line I found out they let her get her library card at age 4, as opposed to 6, because she was such a great reader for her age. At the end of kindergarten, I asked my mom if she would take Maggie and I to see Disney's Hercules. We had such an awesome time, pizza beforehand of course, and then movies, and then my mom bought us Hercules pencils and baby Pegasus stuffed animals. I remember Maggie's face, so bright and happy. That was the end of kindergarten. I saw very little of Maggie after that, and she died the following fall. She had leukemia. My mom never told me, because she feared I would treat Maggie differently. Hell, I probably would have. I was 6 at this point. The news of her death made me cry harder than I had ever cried, and I cried all night. I hope that my friendship and fun times I had with Maggie had some sort of impact on her short life. I still have my Hercules pencil and the book she gave me that Christmas. It remains as some of my most personal possessions, and I don't really tell anyone this story, ever. Just recently I found out a friend of mine had moved to New York City. I moved here from Sydney 3 years ago. I hadn't spoken to him in over 10 years as he had moved to London. We caught up, had some beers, and then he told me how life-changing our farewell conversation was. I had no idea what he was talking about. He told me that on the night he was leaving Australia we got really drunk, and then at some point in the night I ranted on about how there is no point in taking life seriously, that it's unlikely any of us will be remembered in 100 years time and that there is nothing we can do about it, but have fun, and be good to one another. I can't remember saying it but it really hit home for him. The 24-hour flight to London entailed him just sitting at his seat and taking in the implications of what I had drunkenly said to him. He was shifting hemispheres to get away from things, but by the time he hit Heathrow, he was a changed man. Spent the next 10 years embracing life for the adventure it could be, traveling all over Europe, making connections with everyone he could, and spreading my message as far and wide as he could. He couldn't thank me enough for turning him from a nervous, uptight, feeble man to the greatest person he could imagine being. I had no idea. TLDR, the 25-year-old version of me was the messiah. I shoulder listened to him. As a kid I saved my friend's dad's life and had no idea he was moving a bunch of drywall or something. They had one of those staircases that is basically a hole in the top floor, stairs going down, with a railing around 3 sides of the hole and one left open so obviously you can go downstairs. I was downstairs. I'm not sure exactly what he was trying to do. All I know is that about 50 to 100 pounds or more. I'm bad at guessing weight. It was probably around 15 to 20 sheets of drywall fell on him and he fell back onto one side of the railing. The railing collapsed and the spindles shot out. I ran over and started pushing up on him as hard as I could until his wife came running and was able to pull the drywall off him and haul him back up. Because of the opening in the floor, if I hadn't prevented him from falling all the way through the railing, it is very likely that he would have hit his head on the other side of the opening, possibly breaking his neck or back in the process. I pretty much just went home and forgot about it. About 15 years later or so I was at the reception of his daughter's, my childhood friend, wedding. His wife was so excited to see me and said you have to come meet friend's dad. I go to meet him and she says you'll never guess who this is. He looks at me and obviously does not recognize me. I ended up very tall and had bright dyed red hair. What if I told you she saved your life? He gasped and said my name. I was like what? I had to go ask my friend what they were talking about. I had literally forgotten all about it. I've been lurking on Reddit for a couple of months now. I'm still a little confused about how it/all work, but this is the first thing that's prompted me to get an account and reply. Here's mine. When I was in high school, perhaps 10th grade or so, we had a new kid, Chad, show up in the middle of the year. Chad was a little different, but very kind. My first memory of him is in gym. We played dodgeball. It was his first day and he didn't have gym clothes, so he played in jeans and cowboy boots. He played the most hilariously intense and exaggerated game of dodgeball. Fearless he was. I guess he was trying to impress us. It was a few weeks later, and I still hadn't really talked to Chad much. Not many of us had. I was driving home on the highway and I saw Chad walking down the road. I pulled over on the shoulder, driving slowly beside him, asked him why he was walking. He told me that he didn't drive to school that day just because he felt like walking. Turns out he lives about halfway to my house, which is 8 miles out of town. I tell him to get in, and I'll take him home. He said no thanks. I told him, dude, get in, I really don't mind. Nah, thanks though. Dude, seriously, you have like 3 miles to walk in those damn cowboy boots. Get in. I'm not leaving till you do. Alright. So, Chad got in, and I took him home. It was a bit out of my way, just by a mile or two, but it gave me a chance to get to know him a little bit. I dropped him off and told him to let me know if he needs a ride. I started to talk to him more, as did others, and Chad started to come out of his shell a little bit. A few weeks later Chad took me aside to tell me thanks for giving him a ride. He didn't leave his car at home that morning because he just felt like walking. He left his car at home that morning because he planned on his walk home after school to commit suicide. When I stopped to pick him that day, he was just waiting for a semi to come along to hop in front of. He didn't want to jump in front of a car or small truck and hurt somebody. Chad ended up becoming very well liked due to his uniqueness. He wasn't the most sophisticated guy around, but he was hilarious in his own way, and he ended up making plenty of friends and being well liked. The story doesn't stop completely there, but this is long enough already. That's my significant moment. I'm a teacher, and I did my student teaching year in an 8th grade, in a city classroom. I had always wanted to teach high school, so I didn't know what to expect from my 8th graders, and the way my teaching program worked, we were pretty much just tossed in there after a month. There were these two kids who were absolutely ruining our class. One of them really followed the other, and every day, they'd be throwing erasers at other kids, making other kids cry, drawing Ben-Ises on things, swearing, the whole 9 yards of middle school. When I asked them why they were doing it, the leader said, "Well, we are bad kids anyway, so why does it matter? Why don't you just kick us out?" I never kicked them out. I gave them timeouts, I gave them lectures, I kept them after school with me, but I never sent them to the principal. I just wrote to them, pages and pages in their notebooks in response to anything they wrote. Eventually, the leader of the two started writing back to me. He told me that, if he wasn't making people laugh, no one would be listening to him, and he didn't think anyone would care about him then. He said he was so afraid that, if he stopped making jokes about other people, they'd start making jokes about him, because he was small, and because he loved his mom. He shared a lot of things with me, that I won't even share with Reddit, because I promised him I wouldn't tell anyone. By the end of the year, he'd become a class leader in a positive way, starting conversations during class discussions, helping kids who were confused, and organizing group work. His friend followed suit. At the end of the year, in his journal, he wrote to me about how much he appreciated that I always believed in him, and told him that I thought he was good, even though he did bad. He also thanked me profusely for not making fun of him, or laughing at him for all of the things he told me in his journal. He eventually went on to a prep school, where he became the captain of the football team, and get straight as, I've never been so proud or so happy in my entire life. I was 14 years old, and got my first, legal, job as a summer camp counselor in training at a day camp. I was assigned to assist the main counselor for this group of 6-7-year-old boys. These kids were hell. The other staff in the camp hated having them in their stations. No matter what class/activity we had, it would all be spent trying to get them to behave. There was one particular kid in the group, Scene, who was basically the ringleader, and would typically get in the most trouble of them all. One day Scene gets in trouble yet again, and the main counselor decided to pull him out of all of the group activities for the day. But since he can't roam the camp aimlessly alone, she asks me to look after him for the day. Great. I expected a day of pure hell, but I ended up just talking to the kid the whole day. We talked about a bunch of different things, including some of his interests, which turned out to be a lot like mine. He liked science and robots, at least from what he'd seen on TV. So for the rest of the summer I would talk to him about different science related topics. He would return every day with questions. I would bring him small science experiments, kids science books, and some of my old robot kits that I loved as a kid that he could do at home. He actually wasn't a nuisance after that day, and at the end of the summer his mom told me he was much better behaved at home too. I remember she seemed like she was near tears, but she gave me a huge tip, so 14y/me really wasn't thinking much about it. Flash forward 10 years. A little kid I know, family friends, goes to the same camp, and her parents ask me to pick her up at the end of the day because neither of them would make it on time. So I did, and I figured it'd be cool to see the camp since I hadn't been back since I was 16. Turns out Scene is now 16 and is working at the camp, teaching science to the kids, doing some of the same experiments I showed him when he was a kid and then some. He recognized me and was overjoyed, thanking me for that talk and that summer. That was when he fell in love with science, and it later grew into a love for engineering. He will be starting his senior year of HS in September and says he wants to major in mechanical engineering when he gets to college, which happens to be my profession. He then went on to tell me about how his parents were going through a bad divorce at the time, and he felt like he was going unnoticed, even by his parents, through all the chaos and confusion going on at home. Acting out and getting in trouble was the best way at that age he could think to get attention. That explained why his mom seemed so emotionally preoccupied. According to him, I was the only adult that seemed to listen to him instead of just yelling at him, and he always respected and loved me for it. I was so overwhelmed at it all I was nearly speechless. TLDR introduced a 7Y/O to science, now 17Y/O and wants to be an engineer. I've only been on Reddit for a short while, but damn it's been dredging up a lot of memories. I know this'll get buried, but fuck it. I went to an all-boys, private, high school, and it was a hellhole. Corporal punishment was still legal. All the boys acted as if it was the penal system. Lots of violence, but to top it off, it was predominantly white. Yes, Australia was ridiculously racist in the 80s. Suffice to say, being a half-caste did not make the experience fun. After many years of copying it, and finally being able to stand up for myself quite aggressively, I tended to be somewhat reactive. Now, I was walking between classes one day, and I see this African kid, a fresh-faced year 7 student, literally surrounded by older kids. They're laughing and he's laughing, because he'd thought he'd made some friends. What they were actually doing, is seeing if a Velcro watch would stick to his hair. I flew into a fit of rage, and told them in no uncertain terms to fuck off. I turned to the kid, and told him he should never put up with that kind of shit. Also, if things got out of hand for him, that he could always come to me, that I'd stand up for him. Interesting side note, I never saw him again at school. Fast forward many years later, and I'm working in a bar. I'm managing, so I'm standing to the side, behind the scenes kinda deal. Anyway, a guy comes up, looking at me expectantly, and I was about to point out the serving bar staff, when I vaguely recognized his face. He wanted to thank me for changing who he was. His family had only recently moved to Australia, back then, of course, and thought that was the only way he was going to make friends, even if they were shitty ones at that. The fact that he could throw my name around meant that he never needed to use me as physical protection, and that my advice gave him confidence that he had been sorely lacking. I was kinda stunned, and got him a drink on the house. Yeah, I'm weird like that. For clarity, I'm not an aggressive person, at least, not now. It was a survival mechanism to get through that faked up school. LT, doctor in high school, stopped an African kid from being degraded, improved his self-worth, or something. I used to visit a college friend of mine once, or twice a year for a long weekend. He lived 200 miles away, so it wasn't like we could easily drop by for a few hours to hang around. One time I had arranged to visit, and a few days beforehand his mother called me and told me that he had been using painkillers, oxycodone, and was abusing them. He had hurt his back at work, and the doctor gave him pain pills, and one thing led to another. At his mother's request, I didn't let him know she had called, but I did manage to get the conversation around to pills, and in a roundabout way he admitted he had a problem. I encouraged him to do something about it as best I could, and he said he'd try. The next day, though, he had me drive him around to several places using his family car instead of mine. I eventually realized he was trying to find some more pills, because he was out, and wanted to use their car, so his wife couldn't follow. I took him back home, and left a few hours later, a bit irritated with him for using me to help him try to find more pills. That was the last time I saw him alive. He died of an overdose 6 months later in April 2004, about the time I was planning to visit again. Before I left we were sitting outside on the porch, and I took some pictures of him with his daughter sitting in his lap. I think she was 5 years old at the time. Those were some of the last pictures taken of him, and I think the very last picture his daughter has of the two of them together. I've been back infrequently in the year since then, and that picture has since been framed, and occupies a prominent place in her bedroom. I still miss him, and I know his wife and kids do too. He has 2 sons as well, but the daughter is the baby, and probably has the least distinct memories of him. I wish I had done more, but for one thing I didn't really know how bad things were for him. His mother didn't tell me much, and he mostly kept up a good front while I was there. I still feel guilty, even though I suppose there's not much I could have done. But I feel good about that picture. When I was in elementary school I was called 4 Eyes. I had very long hair that the kids tried to cut on numerous occasions. Boys didn't talk to me, so they called me a lesbian. Middle school I moved to Texas and my school was predominantly Hispanic. I dressed sort of gothy. The Hispanic boys regularly groped and touched me going down the halls and in class. The girls jumped me because they were afraid the white girls would steal their boyfriends. They called me the freak, Lars Brutus the witch, and the lesbian because I wasn't keen to their sexual advances. High school was the same story. I was still in Texas. The same things were going on my freshman year. Still no positive attention from guys. My body continued to develop, so more sexual advances, and the nickname now was dykey, skank or slutched, or whatever. My parents finally decided they needed to get us out of there. We moved to Kansas. I chopped my hair off. It was down to my knees. The woman who cut my hair was tall, pale, had dark short hair, tattoos, and was beautiful. She had a bandage around her wrist. I knew what it was. I had the same bandages on my thigh. I thought to myself, how can a woman this achingly beautiful be capable of doing that to herself? Her name was Monica. Monica finished my hair, and I felt pretty. For the first time in my entire 16 years of life, I felt pretty. I cried. She cried. Decided that's what I wanted to do. Shortly after I got contact lenses. Started doing my hair and makeup. Got really good at it. My boyfriend was a gay guy who I turned straight. We were in love. Won best hair for senior superlatives. Got my license at 18. Now 23. Doing hair at a prominent upscale salon in an affluent part of town. Pale dark hair, tattoos. Sometimes I get to help a young girl or a woman who wishes she still had her youth feel beautiful. Thank you, Monica. http://.imgur.com/03ul1.png. Okay, here's my moment to shine. About 10 years ago, just discovering Photoshop, I liked messing with pictures of friends. I was pretty cool with my English teacher, which at some point asked permission to give my email to a friend of hers. This girl, let's say Annie, was flirting with a dude in Italy. She was working in the US, but native to my hometown, in EU. So she asks me really nice if I can Photoshop a picture of her and the dude together. She wanted to impress him or some shit, whatever. The chick looked hot, and I can't say no to a hot chick. So I started to work on the picture, and I think I did a really nice job. I sent her the picture, thanked me a lot, and we never really kept in touch. I just kept seeing statuses on her Y Messenger. She'd like finally together rhymed counting the days until I see you again. Girls she'd like that. So, after her status messages I could realize they were in it for the long run, which was true cause a few years later they got married. So, another couple years pass. I'm chilling at a bar and some chick comes and taps me on the shoulder. Hey Lesza, I can't believe we finally met. I'm all like hee, how are you? But in my mind I'm like, who the fuck is she? I know her, but from where? I finally give in and say, look, I know it's awkward, but I can't seem to remember where I know you guys from. After that I saw she had a guy with her. So she says that it's okay. She's Annie and just wanted to thank me from her heart and let me know that they are together because of that picture I made for them. The dude was also really cool, thanked me and shit, and after that they just left. I sat there with a smug look on my face, waited until they were at a decent distance, and bragged to all my mates how small thing I did 10 years ago led to the most romantic thing I've done. P.S. I hop to FSM, you guys don't bury this. My situation is vice versa, in which my life was changed/saved. So my family and I visited Jamaica on vacation, and were at Dunn's River Falls this particular day. For those of you who have never heard of it, it's an attraction which is basically a long waterfall that tourists attempt to climb. There are many different parts to the falls. One part in particular had about a 20-foot drop onto large jagged rocks under the water. I was about 13 at the time, and decided that instead of going around and climbing piece by piece, I could instead climb a ledge and then jump onto the top of this 20-foot drop, thus making it to the next level much faster. They sold waterproof shoes that allowed for more grip when climbing, but being as young and stupid as I was, decided that I did not need them. So I go and jump to make it to the top of the ledge, and I make it, having only enough momentum to get my knees up. This is when it gets bad. I'm sitting there on my knees right at the edge of the fall with my back facing the drop. Because there is no grip and nothing to grab onto, I start sliding backwards. This is when I realized that I was in trouble and I might not come back from this fall. I started to panic, trying to grab onto anything I could, but no luck. It looked like the end for me, and right as I was about to fall to my inevitable doom, a man that looked like he was in his 20s grabs my forearm and pulls me up to safety. This happened in all but 2 seconds, but it felt like minutes. I could not stop thanking him, and was so thankful for him being there. After that I never saw him again, but because of him, I realized that simple things can get you in and out of trouble, and that sometimes someone just needs a hand when trying to get up, literally. From that point on I knew I wanted to do something with my life that could help people. Doesn't matter the situation, big or small, as long as someone's life is being affected positively, I was going to do it. I'm now studying to go to med school and hopefully become an orthopedist. I just wish that this guy knew how much he had an impact on me. This will most likely be buried, but yeah, I had a teacher that has done this to me. As our school was a performing arts school, they obviously heavily tried to influence the students to go in this direction. In the UK, when you turn 14 you choose what specific subjects you want to take for GCSEs. Me, always enjoyed music class, but never thought much of it. Receive a letter home informing my parents that I have achieved A's in music for 3 years, and it would be wise for me to choose this. As I was a very average student that rarely got praised for anything, I was both shocked and keen to pursue this. Unfortunately this would involve me picking up an instrument and learning it intensively to try and do well in a class of my friends who were all heavily talented. We spoke to the head of performing arts, and he said, well, it's not too late to start, go for it. After much hard work I achieved an A. Since I didn't enjoy the theory side of music, and our school had a music technology course taught by this same teacher, I asked him if it was a good idea and he encouraged me to. All through following 2 years he helped me, gave me challenging but realistic targets for my grades, and knew what I needed to work on to get this. I actually did better than he predicted, and he was overwhelmed with joy I had done so well. I decided to take a year out before going to university to get a bit of work and money as I was sick of the learning environment. That summer he sent me a message saying that another high school in the area was looking to hire a music technician and I should apply. I believe he may have sent this to a few of us, but still looked out for us after we left. I applied and got the job. One of the best experiences I've ever had. Gave me a whole new perspective. This then also helped me get into university. I last week graduated from university with a BSc Hons in music technology and hopefully will soon get a job. I'm searching everywhere I can. I think once I get that job, I will contact him to tell him how much the little extra effort he gave to his students has changed my life. Also, I'm one of many students that have similar stories and experiences of this man. He is highly praised in the school. He also directed amazing school productions. I mean, professional standard people would pay good money to see. Works with local primary schools. Used to work closely with the exam boards and pretty much does anything he can. For him to sit down for 10 minutes every week or so and give this little bit of guidance is astounding. TLD, I had teacher in school who suggested I take a subject, even though I had very little knowledge, mainly to increase student numbers. Throughout high school worked with me amongst his many other duties to help me do well. I now have a degree in said subject and hopefully soon a job. I'm late to the game so this will probably never be seen. In 7th grade, I went to Sunday school for my church and this one week they gave us a card that said somebody loves you. Smile and remember everything is great. The idea was to put this somewhere where someone would find it and it would make their day. I set this on the desk of one of my male friends at the time. He saw it, read it, and put it in his pocket. I thought nothing of it at the time. By the end of high school this friend and I had grown apart. After graduating, he came up to me to say congratulations and pulled out his wallet. He showed me the little piece of faded and crumpled yellow paper I had given him 6 years before. He told me he went through a dark time in the middle of high school and got really into drugs, quit baseball, and was contemplating suicide. But though all of that time he remembered this little piece of paper someone had put on his desk. Someone actually did care about him. Whenever he was down he would look at this paper, and it would bring him happiness. He had no idea for several years that it was me who put it there. I think he found out through our teacher, who we still visited now and then. This story always makes me think how things that seem little to you can mean the world to someone else. One of my closest friends lost an eye when she was younger, trying to fight off an attacker. After the incident she was really insecure, which was a total 180 shift from her normal self. She got angry a lot more often too, mostly when her lack of depth perception caused her grief. Well, with her birthday coming up I went to another friend's house who was a doctor and asked if she could get a hold of a real nice eye patch and sew a design into the front of it. She said she would try to attain a quality patch and asked what I wanted sewn into it. I said a big red X. She promptly made it so. The reason for the design was because of what happened immediately after the loss of the other friend's eye, when I was trying to keep her mind off it all. I told her she should get an eye patch with an X on it, like when cartoon characters die. Anyway, the day before my eyeless friend's actual birthday, I gave her the patch and she loved it. Total character shift back to her usual self from then on. The next day we had a party for her birthday that was originally not planned thanks to her mood. She enjoyed herself and could not stop talking about the eye patch of all things. Months later she told me that whenever she feels down, she thinks of the stupid joke I made in her time of need and how I went as far as making it a reality all to see her smile. TLDR, friend lost her eye. I made a stupid joke about an eye patch design. On her birthday I had that exact eye patch made and it turned her whole outlook on life around. Edit, typus. I'm a little late to this, but here goes nothing. I had a friend who I had started to drift apart from lately. We were amazing friends before, though. One day she told some friends and me that her parents had gotten divorced. It was a hard time for her, and so even though we weren't the best of friends, I stuck around to help her. Over time, she started acting extremely moody and would snap at little things and make bad decisions. Basically, her personality changed for the worse, and so I started to drift from her again. A few weeks later, she posted a Facebook status about how screwed up her life was, you know, those melodramatic girl statuses, and it got a ton of comments from people telling her to suck it up, stop whining on Facebook, because she had been doing that lately, and other inconsiderate stuff. I saw this status and I privately messaged her saying I saw it, and that she shouldn't listen to those people, and that she could talk to me if she wanted to. I'm still not 100% sure why I made the decision to do that, because at that point we were basically just acquaintances, but I guess I just felt like she needed someone at the moment. But she responded saying that she was fine, and that she didn't need to talk, and she logged off because she had to leave for something. Fast forward to about 2 months later, this girl chats me on Facebook thanking me. When I asked her why, she explained that she had been cutting herself for the past few weeks and was considering suicide, and me messaging her telling her I was there for her made her stop, reconsider everything, and eventually stop cutting. Now she's loving herself and her life, has a ton of great friends, and we've become great friends again. TLDR. I told a girl I used to be friends with that I was there if she ever needed to talk when she was going through a rough time. She later tells me I helped her stop cutting and convinced her out of suicide. Edit, added a TLDR. In high school, I had drama and economics with this guy Sean. We weren't super close, but I considered us friends. I would sit next to him in economics and he would listen to me talk about my problems. He was a quiet kid, but he would offer some advice, and honestly, him just listening to me was a big help. Helped me feel better when I was down. We also were supposed to be husband and wife in an upcoming play, and I rehearsed at his sister's apartment with him once after school. Unfortunately the play got cancelled, but we had a good time rehearsing. He played me a song on his guitar and I remember telling how impressed I was and that I had no idea he could play guitar. This was senior year of high school. The summer after graduation, he called me up and asked me to go on a date to make his ex-girlfriend jealous. He said that because I was very pretty, she would get jealous and want him back. I accepted, as he had always been very nice to me, listening to my early teenager problems. Something came up. I don't remember what it was, but I had to cancel. He understood and said it was probably for the best anyway not to stir up any drama. A couple months after that, during my first semester of college, I get a text from a friend saying that he had hung himself because of the ex-girlfriend. Needless to say, I was pretty upset. I went on his MySpace just so I could see his face once more and to write something along of the lines of RIP and whatnot, and I saw that I was on his top. I know this seems silly, but most people in the MySpace days didn't put random friends on their top. I felt that I had somehow meant more to him than I ever thought possible. Looking back, thinking about the date phone call, our rehearsal and class time together, and me being on his top, I feel happy that he considered me a good friend. It still pains me when I think about him committing suicide. He was a very talented actor/musician and such a sweet guy. I wish he would have called me before he committed suicide. I'm just happy I knew him. TLDR realized after he had committed suicide how much I actually meant to a high school friend. Edit. Through my story, it seems as though our friendship was imbalanced, but that was not the case. We were school peers who were friends, not close friends. We just hung out at school except for one time, the rehearsal. So, there really is no way that it could be imbalanced. He listened to me talk, I listened to him, although he was a quiet person who didn't talk as much as me. Just so no one gets the wrong impression. Will be buried, but what the hell? My friend has started a tutoring business a few years ago. When I went back to school, I figured I could make a few bucks teaching high school kids math and science. I was majoring in political science, but I had done my collegial in full science. That's the 2 years prep school before high school and university we have here in Quebec. My first ever session was with this 8th grader who was failing. Low self-confidence, he simply considered himself as not good. I followed him for a little over 2 years. He went from a failing situation to top of the class. I mean, this kid was smart. He would buzz through his exercises so that we could talk about particle physics and other stuff. Fast forward 3 years, and he comes to bar/restaurant I co-own on a date with a quite pretty young girl, I must admit. He knew from Facebook I was working there, but just so happened to come in the one night a week I actually work on the floor. He told me he was now in full science. We say natural sciences, as opposed to social science, arts, and letter or business and management. And that it was all because of me. I've never been so proud. My parents divorced when I was young. It was rough going for my mom being single and trying to raise 2 boys. She did an awesome job, but money was always very tight, so we didn't have luxuries. Now for a little relevant backstory. I was born with deformed thumb joints. Nothing crazy, and it wasn't noticeable. But it did make it very hard for me to learn handwriting in school. After years of therapy I now have full range and control. The only reminder of my bad joints is my still atrocious handwriting. So early in school I had a rough time, because most teachers didn't want to bother decoding my squiggles. I even had one teacher try to hold me back and tell my mother I had a learning disability, which was bullshit. So anyway, my mom is a champ. She works her ass off and still finds a little time to date a really nice guy named Jack who works in her office. She doesn't want to make things confusing for my brother and I, so she pretty much keeps Jack to herself for quite a while. We just think of him as a guy our mom works with, but I guess she talks to him about us a lot, so he kind of knows what's going on with my brother and I. When my 10th birthday rolls around we go out to a pizza place for the party and I get a bunch of Nerf guns and other legit swag. I'm feeling pretty stoked. When we get home, though, Jack is sitting in our living room reading a magazine, which was out of the ordinary. My mom quickly tells me that I have one more present and to go check my room. I tear us down the hall and throw open the door to my bedroom. There's something on my desk. At first I think it's a TV, but my mom loathes television, so there's no way. Jack walks in and tells me he's heard I'm a pretty smart kid, so he's giving me a computer for my birthday. I was floored. Like I said, we never had luxuries and this was way before personal computers were common. Even our school only had 2 at the time. It was a second-hand Tandy 1000 that didn't have much beyond DOS and a copy of BASIC. He also gave me a box full of books on programming and a dot matrix printer. I dove straight the fuck in. I taught myself programming, which in turn taught me new methods of problem solving, which was really a new mode of thought which has certainly helped shape me into the person I'm today. One of the biggest things that Tandy did for me was give me a way to work around my terrible handwriting. I got permission from my teachers to take home a lot of my in-class work so I could type it and print it off. They were relieved that they no longer had to guess at what I was writing, and one teacher in particular was amazed at my newfound depth of expression and recommended me for the talented and gifted program at school. Being in tag changed my entire school experience. I met people who were like me and made a lot of good friends. I got to choose new coursework in my other classes if I found it too easy, which I frequently did. That one incredibly generous birthday present from a guy I basically didn't know fundamentally changed the course of my life. Jack Hill, wherever you are now, thank you so much. TLDR, I received a PC from a guy I didn't really know when I was very young, at a time when PCs were rare and expensive. Changed my life. I was friends with a guy named Sebastian who was an foreign exchange student from Germany. When I first met him in my PE class, I thought he was just a regular student at my school, but also though he was a new student, because I never seen him before. That's until I talked to him, and he told me he was from Germany, and immediately I had this surprise look on my face, because I was actually talking to someone that was from another country, that wasn't from Mexico. Lol. One day, I decided to buy him a Christmas gift, because I wanted to show my American hospitality. It was a stained glass mirror etching of the Skyrim logo, because he loved to play video games. When Christmas arrived, I received a call from Sebastian and he said, "Panda, that's my nickname. Thank you so much for your gift. You are best, and I can't believe an American actually cared about me this much. This means so much to me and my year here in US, and you are like my friends back in Deutschland, Germany. You have been such good friend to me this year and cared about me than anyone at school. I'm going to buy you the best Christmas gift in German can give you, but it's little late, but please forgive me. Dank for making me Christmas special." Note, at that time, he had bad English but was improving. Right now, his English is excellent, but he has a lot to learn. After the call, I had a warm feeling around my heart. Not that I'm gay for him, it's just the fact that I made someone's Christmas when they are living in a different country and feeling a little homesick. He is back in Germany and I haven't heard from him in 2 months, and he deleted his Facebook, so I can't contact him. This post made me remember about that moment on Christmas Day, and now I will try my best to contact him. Edit. I remember I made 2 of the Skyrim mirrors. I'll post a picture later. Also, this took place during the 2011 to 2012 school year, so it was recent. A friend of my husband's was following us to a gathering a couple of hours away. He was only 18 and just weeks from graduation. He was a couple car lengths behind me and lost control on a rain-soaked highway. Due to another wreck nearby, the highway patrol was there literally within seconds. We went a mile up to an eatery and waited, about to go nuts, to hear how he was doing. We were all 4 others with us, young, so of course our buddy could not die. We just sat around and nervously joked about how pissed our buddy would be at his wrecked car that he loved so much. I called his mom, who I had never met, and gently told her to go to the town nearest our location so the police could get her to wherever they were taking her son. I was super calm and reassuring because I did not believe anything could happen to an 18-year-old. I was wrong. He died on impact. After finally returning home hours and hours later, we were emotionally, physically drained and numb. Suddenly Aaron binged with a message from a lost friend saying, "Are you there?" After freezing in shock for a moment, I answered and asked, "Who is this?" It was our friend's mom, and she asked if she could call and talk to us, and of course we agreed. Many cleansing tears were shed by all in the next hours of conversation, and we, myself especially, became very close with the mom, speaking at least once a day for a year or more. We are still in contact 10 years later. Couple years after that horrible day, she told me that if I had not called when I did, she has no idea what would have happened. My friend had her cell phone, and she was walking out the door to spend the day working at a piece of rental property that had no phone, and she had decided at the spur of the moment, and no one knew where she was going. It would have been about 8 hours until anyone could have contacted her. The thought of not having been there to get the call and make it to her beloved son's side immediately terrified her. Horrible call to make, and even worse to receive, but to not receive it would have torn her apart. In the pre-Windows 95, pre-internet days when we had DOS as our operating system and some version of Windows 2.x or 3.x may also be loaded as a GUI, a neighborhood kid whose younger brother was friends with my kids came over with his computer because he couldn't use it and had nowhere to start. It was some kind of hand-me-down, probably a 286 or 386 with like an 40 meg HD 40 meg with an M. It booted up to a C/ prompt just like it should, but he was stuck. So over the next hour or so, I taught him all of the DOS commands and utilities I could show and explain to him. It was apparent defrag had never been run on it, and as it turned out the PC had plenty of programs loaded, he just didn't know get to them. He was sharp, so I briefly touched on the subject of batch files. Apparently that hour I spent with him changed his life. He absorbed what I showed him, and he hit the ground running, graduated HS the following year and now has several degrees in computer science, computer engineering, and more, but I've lost track. I didn't know this until a couple of years ago, when I was out mowing my yard or something. He was walking down the street, so I shut the mower off to say hi, and he filled me in on his accomplishments and the awesome job he has. I just said, "Good for you, that's pretty cool," and he looked at me kind of funny, and said something to the effect of "You don't really know how much of that has to do with you, do you?" Then he went on to explain that I was the one who lit the spark that started him on his journey, because I was so patient and took the time to tell him what I know and what he wanted to know. I was absolutely shocked, as I had no idea I had that effect on him. That was the highlight of my week, to say the least. When I was 22, I met a 16-year-old that I had to train as a cook at a very popular and famous fast food restaurant chain. At the time, I was an overweight, though sharp-tongued, nerd, and he was literally the star of the football team, charismatic and funny. At first, I really didn't think we would get along, but he really appreciated my humor and the fact I was extremely drug-friendly. So we started hanging out a little at first, and it kicked up into a full friendship. He made a lot of YOLO-type decisions, faking just about every girl who would open their legs, etc. One night we were drunk, and he began to talk about this really hot, really funny girl at his school that just wouldn't give him the time of day. I said, "Well, then, she sounds pretty faking smart, too." "What do you mean?" "Well, maybe if you were responsible with any other endeavor than being faking Johnny Football Hero, she would offer you more attention. From here on, we are going to call him Johnny." "Johnny Football Hero? What does that mean?" I shrugged. "Man, you talk just way over my head." We both end up leaving our employer, and he moves the next town over, and we pretty much fall out of touch. So a couple years pass, and he's now 18. We run into each other at Walmart, exchange numbers, and we start hanging out again. Now, however, he's doing meth. Well, he's also got a hookup for weed, which is another meth head couple in a full-on tweaker house. They were cool with me buying weed, because I'd smoke with them, and my friend vouched I was cool. Now, my friend is a big motherfucker, still. We trust each other, so I felt very comfortable in the environment, because I knew for a fact he would have my back. However, one night, the master tweaker of the house was ripped off by a third party I didn't know. He started freaking out with anger, and I was completely fine, until he went into his bedroom, grabbed a 9mm, and came back out saying that he was going to kill this third party. Now I'm high as fuck, on weed, remember, and while I'm rocking my poker face, my anxiety is through the roof. Johnny, methed out himself, stands up and talks him down by saying let me just kick his ass. I told Johnny, "Dude, we can take my car. Let's go." The master tweaker put up his gun and said, "Yeah, go fuck him up," faking let that motherfucker know who he's faking with. We get in the car and I start driving to my house. "Johnny, where are we going?" "Dude, we are going to my place. We are going to drink beers, and come down, and go to sleep." "What the fuck, man? Why the fuckers? Might as well say it. Tony's problem your goddamn problem." He's going to consider the job done and calm the fuck down, and you're going to tell him that we searched all night and couldn't find the motherfucker. Expletive deleted. That's faking bullshit. You need to drive there right now. I'm about to go off on an adventure, motherfucker. How about this? We are going to grab a case of Natty Light and climb up on the top of the old business building and piss on people as they walk by. How about that? He laughs. And that's exactly what we did, though he only pissed on one scrawny guy and I didn't take part. It's douchey, but it was definitely better than the alternative. As the night progressed, we got pretty damn drunk, and he was coming down from the meth. He ended up in tears, and talked about how his parents won't talk to him, his friends from high school just don't give a shit, and he can't get a good, decent, just a faking decent girl, not a faking slut to give him the time of day. I'm just a loser. I'm just a piece of shit. I failed everyone. Well, you know how to change that, right? I can't faking change it. I'm a piece of shit. Then stop being a piece of shit. Man, you're trying to make it sound easy. Man, I faked over everyone I know. You haven't faked me over. Yet. Dead stare. Yet. I just don't know what to do. I'm not saying it's easy, but I would start with making a conscious effort in not faking people over. You just don't understand. That's just who I am. I became strangely cognizant, perhaps due to adrenaline, and faking went off. Why in the flying fuck are you defining yourself? You don't define yourself, you decide yourself. Everyone else is going to faking define you, and it takes no goddamn effort from you. So faking let them. But you have to remember that you are not defined by what you've done. I became cold and deliberate, and got right into his face. You're defined by what you're going to do. I relaxed and gave a solid pause. I think it's time to crash out. You wanna just crash on my couch? Yeah. And we pretty much said nothing else that night. When I woke up, he was already gone. I didn't bother to contact him for about 4 days, and when I did, he invited me back over to the tweaker house. I didn't respond. 2 weeks later, he texted me to see if I wanted to come over to the tweaker house. I made up an excuse. We stopped talking. About 8 months later, I heard about him, Master Tweaker, and MT's girlfriend getting popped for trying to steal an address. MT's girlfriend rolled over like a dog, and a bunch of other people got popped. By the time it came to Mountain Johnny, they didn't have anyone to rat out. Because Johnny was the driver and only an accessory, he ended up with a 2-year sentence. So flash forward, I'm 28 and Johnny is 22. I go into the bank to close my bank account because I'm in the process of moving again. And when I walk into the bank, bam, there's Johnny with a pretty girl that doesn't really look like his type. He's put on weight and I'd lost quite a bit, so I'm hoping he doesn't recognize me, but I kind of want him to. He happens to look over his shoulder and is elated. He comes over and we start chatting. Something seems really different about him. He demands to take me out to dinner, and I reluctantly agree. We go out to dinner, and he avoids really wanting to talk about the time since I last talked to him, but it really wasn't like he was hiding something from his girl. They kept exchanging knowing looks, and she would smile and rub his back. He eventually asked, after we finished the meal, for his girl to hang out at the bar for a second, so we could talk, and I was very unnerved. You know I went to prison, right? Yes, I do. Pause, and he was collecting his thoughts. Man, I never got the Johnny football hero until my first night in prison. I was really ashamed that night, and I was thinking about everyone who loved me who I failed. My mom, my dad, and while I was beating myself up, I thought of you. And the second I did, it finally made faking sense. I was far more concerned with being the coolest guy in the room, rather than looking out for my best interests. And then I started thinking about the other shit you said. The night when we were pissing on that guy. Laugh, you pissed on that guy. But it's gravy. Laugh, well, you said something like I'm not what I've done, but what I'm going to do. Not that also hit home. And I spent the next 8 months focused on that. They ended up giving me 2 years, but because of my behavior, they paroled me at 8 months. So now I'm just doing this coal mining. I've got an excellent woman who, we are getting married. And I'm going to be a father. Holy fuck. Me, dude. I'm seriously faking speechlessly happy for you, Johnny, as purely as I've ever seen someone utter the words, and without skipping a beat. Thank you. Seriously. Me, this calls for a faking shot, right? He looks over to his fiancée, who is sitting at the bar, and makes a drink motion in the question face. She smiles real big and nods. He slaps the table. Let's faking celebrate. She was DD. It was a boy. He's a faking spitting image and a shadow of his father. I'm uncle expletive deleted. We've remained best friends since. Also, I'm paraphrasing all conversations, but they are all very close to the original. Sophomore year of college, one of my best friends, who was like a sister to me, was really down in the dumps and super depressed about school and the way her life was going, and a bunch of other stuff. One night she texted me asking to come over. We lived in the dorms, and she was actually my next door neighbor, so it was a really short walk. I went into her room and she gave me a note she had written. It wasn't really a suicide letter, but it did discuss her depression, and how she thought nobody would miss her if she were gone. I read it through, and began to cry, telling her I don't know what I'd do if she left us, and that there were a lot of us who would miss her. We chatted for a while, tears were shed, and when I left I suggested I take and hide her kitchen knife set. She was an avid cook/baker, so she couldn't turn them on herself. Sometime later, I don't remember how long, she and I were going for a walk one evening and just talking about stuff when she brings up that night. She admitted to me that on that fateful evening, she had decided she would climb to the top of the campus parking garage and throw herself off, but that after talking with me, she changed her mind. I was stunned speechless at the thought that she might have actually done this, and the sudden realization that, if it hadn't been for me, she would have. Since then, she has been to rehab and gotten counseling, and now has a steady boyfriend who is really good for her, and she seems to be doing much better overall. But the thought of how close she was to the edge, it still makes me shudder. TLDR, I inadvertently stopped my friend from committing suicide. When I was 14 or 15, I'd hopped in the shower getting ready for a big date, or something like that, when the phone rang. It was an old friend from junior high, and he really needed to talk. I explained to him I was currently naked and only answered the phone in case it was the girl in question. This was early 90s, mind you, no cell phones or caller ID. He stressed that it was important. I told him I understood, and I'd call him when I got out of the shower. He kept telling me it was important to the point of getting pushy. I kind of snapped at him, told him to chill out, and I'd call him back. After about 10 or 15 minutes I go to call back and there was no answer. Went on my date, the details of which I couldn't remember to save my life, and didn't think twice. Tried calling a few times the next day and the day after, no luck. Oh well, being young I moved on to whatever it was young people move on to. A few weeks later I tried calling again and get his sister on the phone. When I ask for him, she starts sobbing and telling me he'd leapt to his death a few weeks ago. Felt guilty but got over it in the weird way self-absorbed teenagers do. Much later I was talking to a mutual friend who was closer to him than I was. Turns out he was seeking me out because I was the one who always made sense. He felt like I never bullshitted him and that I was the one to turn to. That destroyed a bit of me that hasn't come back. I used to feel as though I'd killed him. I know that's not true. The truth is I didn't do all I could to help him live. Never again. Sorry to be such a downer, but though my role was confined mostly to the end of someone's life, I felt it was significant nonetheless. Edit, spelling, grammar, etc. Another life-saved story. I'm an outspoken and nice person typically. In high school, me and a friend would get to the classroom door for band a few minutes or so early and shake the guys' hands, give the girl band members a hug and greet them to class. Small school, despite being in the band we were also athletes and popular. One bandmate was a shy and to herself girl. I'd hate to call her emo, but her hair/makeup etc. was very punk rockish, and she was always in a bad mood. She didn't have any friends, and was very much a loner. Regardless her general attitude, we would talk during band as we both played the alto sax, and she always cheerfully ran up to me to get her pre-class hug. During a parade we were marching in one day, I noticed she was more upset than usual, and didn't even play her sax as we marched. I talked to her a little as she was packing her things afterwards, but she didn't have much to say. Me and some friends were planning to go eat somewhere, so I decided to invite her along. She wasn't talking much, but maybe the company would cheer her up. Little did I know. Fast forward about 3 years and I see her out at the store. I didn't immediately recognize her, but she did and ran up to me and hugged me as tightly she could. I was a bit confused, and she was even a little teary-eyed. She looked nothing how I remembered her. This was an attractive young lady dressed nicely and with child. Once I realized who she was, started talking and asked why so emotional. We exchanged numbers, since she requested we not talk about it at the store. That night we talked for several hours on the phone. She explained how she moved to our school with no friends and how much she hated life at that point in time. She was in an abusive family setting growing up, admitting that her own father would beat and molest her and her siblings. When she was 15, her father impregnated her and forced an abortion via clothes hanger. In doing so, she was so badly damaged she later discovered she may never be able to bear children. She was an abused emotional wreck with no one, not even family, to turn to. She told me how the one thing that got her through each day that year was that she sat next to me in band and how nice I was. She looked forward every day to being greeted at the door with a hug and having someone make her smile at least a little. The day I invited her out to eat with me and my friends was the day she decided she had had enough. She was planning to return home one last time and overdose on several bottles of medication she had collected in preparation for the day. By taking her with me and my friends, we prevented her from doing so. After that day she would talk and sit with me and my friends during lunch and other times. She had at least a couple friends now to look forward to seeing each day. She is newly married. Her father is in jail for his vain and sick acts, and despite being told she could never bear children, she is currently pregnant and healthy. She said she owes her life and her child's life to me. I cried like a baby the whole time we talked on the phone. TLL, same moral from all the other stories. Be nice to people. You never know how many lives you will touch or save. Last December I was at a hardcore show and picked someone's phone up off the ground, held it in the air assuming its owner was still nearby. Between every song I did this until the show was over, when I walked out with the phone in the air looking for its owner. On the way home I tried to unlock it to call one of the contacts in hopes of returning it. No luck. The next day I brought it to the Sprint store to see if they could find the owner. No luck again. That night I posted it on the Facebook event page that I had found a phone and to contact me if they had lost one. 3 days later I got a message from the owner of the phone. She described it, and it was in a bunch of her Facebook pictures too. I got her address and mailed it to her. She insisted on paying me for postage, but it was only $5, so I told her not to worry about it. A few weeks ago, I get a message from the girl saying she had an extra ticket for the band I had found her phone at and wanted to know if I wanted it. So I went, and we hung out for a bit before the show. Turns out, the day after the show this girl had found her mother after she had committed suicide. Her father was less than willing to take care of the arrangements, considering they were divorced, so this girl, 19 years old, ended up making a lot of the choices in the end. She told me that she felt like the world was against her and everything was going wrong. The one good thing that came of that week was that a stranger found and returned her phone. She said the little act of kindness was huge for her. TLDR, returned a lost phone ended up being the lone bright spot in the worst week of someone's life. When I was a freshman in junior high, I had a lot of jerk-off assholes for friends. I was a bit class clownish, and I hung out with people that made me laugh, I guess. My humor helped me work around some social circles that I had no place in, being a badly dressed nerd in a low-income, single mother family, and many of the people I went to school with were better off than I. I'm not bitching or complaining, and others have had it way worse than me. I'm just trying to frame a standard for a young person who probably tried too hard, a lot. Anyway, there was a kid at school that was very effeminate. We used to mock this kid horrendously, call him a fag, the whole nine. No, we never physically abused him in any way, ever. What we did to this person psychologically was deplorable. My mother was an abject racist and homophobe. Maybe she still is. I have to think about that one, and raised me with her tenets for sure. We made fun of the way he spoke. We yelled stupid shit to him in the hallways. He kinda tried to earn her friendship and we just mocked him even harder. It would be years later in the summer before high school, before I ever even met a gay person who was out of the closet. Knowing this person really opened me up. I was 13 over 14 and had never really thought about what it meant to be a homosexual. I became very good friends with this other guy and completely reassessed everything I had stupidly believed while growing up. No, this isn't a coming out of the closet story. I'm pretty safely hetero, I'd say, but after meeting him and his friends, then reading some books written by gay people, and, I'd say, pretty much absorbing and enjoying gay culture as much as I could, I couldn't even remember who this homophobic person was that I had previously been. I ran into the guy from junior high when I was like 18 or so. By this point he had come out of the closet. I faced him and begged him for forgiveness and told him my story and how faking stupid I had been. He told me that our taunts used to make him cry when he went home after school, especially because he had a big crush on one of my friends. Me and this person, the previous object of my scorn and ridicule, would wind up becoming very close friends. TLDR, I was a piece of shit homophobe, hurt someone's feelings more than I had ever known, but eventually became a better person. I have one from the other side of the story. Someone unknowingly saved my life. I was in high school and have suffered from severe depression for my years. This was at the height of it, undiagnosed and untreated. I was in the library, having just broken up with a boyfriend, had a fight with a friend, whatever teenage drama at the time, I forget, and whatever it was, had been the last straw. I was sitting at a table writing a suicide note. The most popular boy in my high school saw me writing, looking sad. Take note, I was a huge nerd, and was mostly invisible to everyone but my friends. He sat at the table and I expected him to tell me to beat it or something, so I started gathering my things. He said, "No, stay. How are you?" "I'm Pat, last name, but everyone calls me Patch." And I said, "I know who you are. I'm alright. I'm Amanda Majert, real name." And we kept small talking and such for an hour or so, and the bell rang to go to class, lunch break, and he walked me to class and that was that. I threw the letter in the trash and went to talk to the school counselor who helped me get professional counseling and I, obviously, didn't kill myself. All because the most popular boy in school took an hour out of his day to cheer up one of the biggest dorks in school because she looked sad. He'd say hi to me whenever he saw me after that, invited me to a few parties and such. We were friends, but not close. He was wonderful. He died in Feb of 2008 in a car crash in Fort McMurray, Alberta. I never did get to tell him how he saved my life that day, but I like to think that he knew. When I was younger, maybe 7ish, my grandpa was rushed to the hospital after having a stroke. The doctors said his chances of survival were small. This was because, before he had his stroke he had been diagnosed with leukemia. Apparently the leukemia made the stroke even worse. As soon as my mother found out, we rushed over to the hospital, where he was being treated. His eyes were half open, and he looked completely different from the happy grandfather I was used to seeing. As soon as he noticed me, his heart rate went up, and he had a big smile on his face, and was eager to talk to me. We chatted, and talked about how school was doing, and just acting like nothing was wrong. As a 7-year-old, I didn't understand much about strokes, and so I considered it just another sickness like the flu. I didn't find out until later, from one of the doctors, that I could have potentially saved his life. The doctor said that the chances of him dying were increasing drastically until I came into that room, which was when they noticed big differences in his statistics, i.e. the heart rate mentioned earlier. In the time he was talking to me, his ill effects were starting to diminish. Every day, after school, I would visit my grandpa and watch him go from hospital bed to wheelchair to standing up on his own 2 feet. Later on, in a visit to my grandparents, I heard my mom talking to my grandpa about the accident and discreetly listened, as any curious kid would. My grandfather said that when he saw me, he promised himself that he wouldn't let himself die. He said that he forced himself to get better because he needed to see me grow up and become an adult. Those words touched me when I first heard them, and they still do to this day. It's unlikely anyone will see this, but I wanted to share too. My younger brother, who we will call, was always a bit of a socially awkward penguin growing up. He loved catching small animals and bugs, was obsessed with turtles, enjoyed everything miniature from macro machines to dollhouse furniture, and, to make matters worse, he didn't care about his looks or hygiene very much. Other kids thought he was weird and gross, and he didn't have a lot of friends. My older brother is kind of an ass, and teased both Elle and I constantly. Mostly likely because of this, Elle and I started to hang out together. We'd go to various ponds and streams and I'd help him catch turtles/fish/ whatever happened to be in the water. I was never any good at this, but he didn't seem to mind. When he started school I'd always sit next to him on the bus, walk to and from the bus stop with him, help him with his homework and just generally do all of the other nice things that my older brother never did. What's more, when Elle started picking on my younger sister in the way that my older brother picked on me, I quickly put him in his place and he stopped. Elle continued to be awkward in high school, so I invited him to take some classes with me and even got one of our teachers to accept him into a full class. He slowly opened up, started brushing his teeth, and managed to find some good friends by the time our younger sister joined him in high school. When Elle was 18 and I was 20 he moved away for about a year and then moved back home. He told me when he got back how much he missed me, that I'd been his best friend his whole life and he couldn't have made it through without me. It didn't even occur to me until that moment what an impact I had made. I was just being a sister, but he saw me as the one consistently good part of his life. He is now an incredibly talented artist and is going to school as a zoology major. He and his gorgeous wife live in Hawaii, where they go hiking and tide pooling on a regular basis. She has told me the impact that she has seen me have in his life, including, but not limited to, how he treats her, and it brought me to tears. TLDR thought I was just being a good big sister to my socially awkward brother, and learned later that he considered me his lifelong best friend. His wife tells me how much I've done for him too. This is my chance for a confession on the flip side, I suppose. I was having an absolutely rotten day. I was being bullied by a customer that loved nothing more than to cheat on me and try to get me fired. That customer very nearly got his wish when he complained about a computer issue and then complained to my boss about my using the internet. So the boss checks up on me and finds me on the computer, pulls me off, and says you're fired. I'm tailing my boss back to his office when I see the customer with the biggest shit-eating grin his life. Some of the senior coworkers realize what has transpired and hit the phones, so my boss's lines were ringing. Boss asks me to wait outside his office. The longest 5 minutes ever. So one of the new coworkers comes over and asks me if I'm okay. It's Danny. Back then he looked like, well, a hipster I guess. He had a true Norville Shaggy Rogers look to him, soul patch, glasses and all, and the kindness to boot. I say that I'm holding up despite my expression and face saying otherwise. The boss comes out and tells me to get in his office. Danny disappears. The boss informs me that senior coworker stood up for me that time and that I needed a lot of work in my work ethics. He wasn't letting me go because the odds of finding someone who knew computers, let alone their computers, better in short notice was slim. I step out of the office and back onto the floor, looking so relieved to have dodged that bullet. The absolute look of fury on the customer when he saw my relieved look could have melted an ice statue. I get back to my station, where the customer proceeds to bend me over and go in dry, complaining all the while about how bad I am. I catch Dana's eyes while he is working in the stacks and he just winks and nods. The customer lodges several more complaints determined to finish the job, but at the end of the day, has to leave like everyone else. We've closed up and finished the day. I was moving slower than everyone else, and then Danny comes up from behind. Are you sure you're okay? I stoically/stubbornly say yeah. I guess he didn't buy it because he just wraps his arm around my shoulders, just leans on me, and escorts me to my car. Stands there until I start the car and waves goodbye in the taillights. I never told him this, but he pulled me back from the brink that day. I was seriously contemplating just getting in the car and driving until the tank read empty, or doing something worse. Not me, but my father, who has taught me everything I know about how to treat others. I've been told dozens of stories about his generosity, but two stick out. The first is a story one of his old med school teachers told me when I was around 11. One night fairly early on in his residency at Boston City, an old homeless man came in, we'll call him Frank, who had an extremely infected abscess in his jaw. Due to circumstance, Frank had been suffering from this infection for quite some time, and by the time he finally made it into my dad's he was pretty close to death. As is sadly the case with many homeless adults, no family could be found, so my dad stayed with Frank well after his shift into the morning, talking to him, providing him some comfort, and trying to make him less afraid. In the end, Frank made it through the night, and over the next few years would drop by to see my dad. Sadly, he passed on a few years later. The second is similar, but made a much stronger impression on me, because I was around to see it. At this point my family had moved to the small town where I grew up, and my dad had opened his own oral surgery practice. One of his regular patients was a woman, Rose, who was well into her 90s. Over the years he had done thousands of dollars worth of dental work on her, but never accepted any payment. In exchange, Rose would make these beautiful thank you cards and send them to my dad. In 2007 I was working in his office as a lab tech, preparing instruments, cleaning rooms, etc., when the call came in that Rose has died. This was a surprise, because she had just been in 2 weeks before for some routine work. A few days later, one of the orderlies from the nursing home where Rose lived showed up to the office with a stack of thank you cards she'd written, but apparently forgotten to send. That's one of the handful of times I've seen my dad cry. That moment has taught me more about compassion than all the sirs in the world. TLDR, my dad's my hero. I'm super late to the party, but I know some people click new on threads like this, so I will share. I'm a teacher in an inner city school which is 98% black. I love working there, but it is very challenging at times. I taught reading, which is a remedial course, when this happened. There I was, having worked at this school for 4 years, sitting at graduation. The salutatorian went up to speak. He was a Haitian immigrant, and delivered part of his speech in Creole, and then went into his very inspiring story. He talked about how he knew his parents had given everything to bring them here, and that his father told him over and over again that in the US, he could be whatever he wanted to be in life. All he had to do was work hard in school. This kid was the oldest. He was in 7th grade when they came. He spoke no English. In 9th grade, he was in my reading class. It was a tough group. A big class, lots of boys and tough girls with stuff to prove, and no real interest in improving themselves. I liked them, but they made it hard. The Haitian kid was kind of a nervous Nell about his grades, and I remember him bugging me about having a B when he wanted an A, but he worked hard, and he deserved an A. I'm sure he got one in the end. I don't remember much about him from that class beyond that. Anyway, at graduation 4 years later, he was giving his speech, and chose a single anecdote from his time at our school to illustrate the power of people believing in him. As soon as he started telling it, I realized it had been in my class. It made me feel like I was truly an educator, and honestly, that moment confirmed that I'm doing good work and making the difference I want to make. He said, when I first came here, my clothes didn't match, and I didn't speak English. Kids made fun of me. In 9th grade, the teacher asked me to read aloud in class one day, and when I was finished there were some kids that were laughing at me. The teacher told them that they can laugh now, but that I worked harder than all of them, and one day I would be their boss. I'm here to tell you that not one of those people is walking across this stage today. I cannot describe how that affected me. So I guess this story is one in which both people impacted each other without really realizing it at the time. I've been thanked in cards and letters, and in person and in meaningful glances and twice in valedictory speeches, but that first time really told me I had done it. He's in med school now, and I'm trying to figure out how to get the other ones across the stage. This will probably get lost, but might as well. When I was a kid I used to listen to Love a Line with Dr. Drew Pinsky and Adam Carolla for all the such stories listeners called in with. One of the phrases Drew kept repeating was there's no being neutral. When you're a family member of a drug addict, you're either part of the solution or part of the problem. Years later my sister, who is 12 years older than me, got married to this abusive scum. He used to beat her constantly and eventually she turned to drugs. She was a severe heroin addict. Her hair was falling out, her teeth were chipping, and she was totally lost. I never had a close relationship with her because of the age difference. My parents totally gave up on her. I'm not judging them, but they completely erased her from their minds. She had two beautiful daughters ages 7 and 4 who were caught in the crossfire of the spousal abuse and the drugs. Dr. Drew's words finally hit home, and I decided to take action. I quit my job, moved to her state, and devoted my life to helping her. It was 3 years of hell, trial and error, and not being appreciated. She cursed me, called the cops on me, and threatened my life. But I knew, if I were to give up I was giving up on her and my nieces. After 3 hellish years she was finally getting clean. She was starting to speak coherently, and started being a mom again. I had no money, I had a criminal record, but my sister and her daughters were safe in their own home. I met Dr. Drew in Los Angeles 2 months later, and I just lost it. 3.5 years of tension finally came to a head, and I burst out in tears. I gave him a hug, and told him everything. He said it was the most moving thing he had ever heard from anyone, his patients or radio listeners. TLDR, blood isn't water. I paid the price, saw results, and all thanks to a jock who had no clue the impact he had on an entire family. I've battled depression for years now, but the lowest point of my life was when I was around 13. I was suicidal and reckless. I sneaked out of my house and went to a house party. There I met this girl, and at first I just wanted to bang her, but as we drank and hung out we clicked and got to know each other. I found out that she was just as depressed as me, and we sat talking all night. We started to see each other and soon fell in love. I talked her out of suicide more times than I can remember. One particularly bad night I called over, sneaking out again. I spent the night with her, but I had to leave to be back in time for school. She knew this and made me leave. I made her promise, as always, not to do anything stupid. She said that I was the greatest thing in her life, and she told me she loved me for the first time. Unfortunately, she couldn't cope anymore, and she did kill herself that night. I failed to save her, but she had made sure that I knew that I had saved her life so many times, and that she was so grateful, and she loved me. To be honest, I struggle sometimes to see it that way, but I'm somewhat comforted by the fact that I brought some happiness and love to her otherwise bleak life. I miss her more than I can express, and I know I will never connect so purely and completely with another person, nor will I love anyone as much as I love her. I don't believe in God or heaven, but sometimes, when I'm low, I talk to her, as if she could somehow hear me. Sometimes I dream I'm in her bed holding her, and I wake briefly happy, but then the sad realization that I will never hold my broken angel in my arms again makes me weep. When I was about 10 years old, it was my last day at school due to my family moving, but it wasn't the last day of school. So we went on this bus trip to some place, I forget where, and they let you pick up seed packets from various plants and whatnot to put in your garden/pot to teach you how to grow, and it was supposed to be some big thing that teachers helped out with. It was a very exciting trip for me, even if I wouldn't get to participate in the activities that would follow in the next few weeks. It was still a wonderful trip for me that I remember to this day. I ended up needing 2 paper bags to hold all the flower seeds I picked up. I'm an American male. Yes, I'm not the most masculine man. This is notable later on. We all come back after the school had shut down for the day, so most of the kids either walked home or were waiting for their parents to come pick them up. I knew my mother was still at work and my father was already deceased at this point in my life. Go Navy. So I decided to check out the goodies I had managed to get and dream of all the colors of the different flowers I would plant. And that is when the bully of this school that had been tormenting me ever since I got there, new kids get targeted often, came up to me with his 2 buddies and starts calling me faggot/homo/etc for getting seeds of flowers and whatnot instead of nothing like a real man, and on and on. What he doesn't know is that I'm used to bullies and how to handle them. This is also my last day. I throw the first punch, 1 vs 3. This is a good strategy, and we start the fight. In the course of the knockdown drag out fight with these 3 guys, I ended up losing my bags of flower seeds, as trying to protect something in a bully fight only serves to open you up for their type of tactics. I end up scaring off one of his minions after only a few hits. I take out the main bully fairly quickly after that, and the last guy took a bit more of a beating, but he finally went down and gave up. I managed to, barely, beat them out. Bloody, bruised and sore, I walk home to clean up, so my mom won't see that I have been fighting. We move the next day. About 20 years later, I'm home on Christmas leave after getting back from Afghanistan. Go Navy. And I'm hanging out with one of my sisters and my mother, having a few beers and enjoying a board game. I really like board games. They had moved back to this town only that year. My other sister comes in with some guy I had never seen before, and I thought he was just some guy from work or something. Turns out he had never left this town and was an actual witness to the fight and the aftermath. I asked him what had happened. Well, when spring rolled around, flowers, faking flowers everywhere. Apparently during my fight with the bully, we had ended up spreading the flower seeds all over the schoolyard, to the great delight of all the children and the confusion of the faculty. To this day there are still flowers that sprout up in the spring. TLDR, got into a fight with a bully. Flowers resulted. PS. Wow, Reddit's formatting sucks. This is an amazing thread, and my post will likely be the least impressive, but I'm hoping it may help others who have a friend like mine. When I was in college, I worked with a Turkish student who hadn't spent much time in the US, and, as a result, was pretty insecure with his ability to communicate fluently in English. I was always helping Mirad with his English, whether it was with writing, speaking, understanding the nuances in his conversations with me or our customers, and serving as voluntary translator when he struggled to communicate with customers and or fellow workers. I think living in a new country that speaks a different language scared the hell out of him, because not being able to communicate effectively is a huge impediment to living well. The thing about my bond with Murad was that I could understand what he was trying to say when no one else could, so I was able to keep people comfortable when they were with Murad. I still think he's the most amazing person I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. He was 4 years older but decades wiser. He helped me understand that being a good person is more than just helping out someone else, but that it requires one to reconsider his/her worldview in many aspects, and he taught me the power that comes from listening carefully to others. To end this story, I'll explain the moment that I understood how much I helped him. During our last few hours together, he returned to Turkey. Out of the blue, he told me that if he ever becomes the Prime Minister of Turkey, he'll have a golden statue of me placed in front of the Capitol building. It was a funny line, but the sincerity and graciousness in his voice and face really hit me. He started telling me what a difference I made for him, and that the gift of my friendship was something he could never repay me for. It really was a hell of a goodbye. We still email, though. So please, do what I did for Murad. Help foreigners who are struggling with language and communication. TLDR, don't pass up on the opportunity to help a foreigner who is struggling with language and communication. The gift is much bigger to him/her than it will seem like to you. This will probably be buried, but I don't care. I felt like I should share this story. I was invited to the school bonding thing this last year, and there were a few people from my cross-country team that went to the camp also. During this bonding camp, I was in a very dark place and was really considering suicide. One girl from my team would occasionally come and talk to me and have some small talk. She seemed really nice, and she was really pretty, so I always welcomed when she would try and talk to me. The bonding camp eventually ended, and everything eventually went back to normal, despite the camp's best attempts. A while later though, I saw that she was online on Facebook, and since I was still depressed as shit, I decided I might as well talk to her and see how she was. She was kind of sad also, so we exchanged numbers just in case one of us needed a shoulder to cry on. I needed it more than her, though. My depression got worse and worse. No matter what happened in my life, I hated it, and everyone around me never seemed to notice how shitty I was feeling. So I kept talking to her, becoming better friends, talking out my problems, etc. One day, after a party that I was basically a loner at, I was on the car ride home, and I was really feeling depressed. I really just wanted to kill myself as soon as I got home. So, I figured it would be a good time to text her. After a little bit of texting her, I grabbed a bottle of painkillers and was about to sneak them into the bathroom and take all of them, but then I decided to just wait and talk to her. I figured I should talk it out before I made any life-altering decisions. That was a few months ago, and as much as I want to leave you with this, I'm feeling better now, and we are dating. Nonsense. I'm still depressed as hell, though all of my antidepressant consuming. I am, however, still friends with the girl though, and she does really help me get through things still, and she really has saved my life on more than one occasion. Basically, if she hadn't have talked to me at the bonding camp, I would have never have gotten her number. Thus I might have actually killed myself already. TLDR, talked with girl at school event that I already knew, got her number. She ended up saving my life. I was in college and my friend was dating this girl. They broke up and she wanted me to talk to him about it. I didn't. They got back together and everything was okay. She continued to talk to me a lot, and she worked in the computer lab at school. I was a computer engineer. I lived in there. I would talk to her when I was bored, or sometimes help her when she had some technical question. Even though she probably knew what she was doing, she would stay up and talk to me until late, 2 AM or so, and I was fine, because I was programming anyways. I knew I had a crush on her at some point, but she was dating a good friend, so I let it go. I eventually told her I had a crush on her, never actually making a move, but I had to say it. She was okay with it, but didn't have the same feelings. Later her boyfriend became uncomfortable with us talking all of the time, and so I just stopped with about 3 weeks or so in the semester. I was bitter on the inside, but dealt with it, and it worked out, because I was interning away the next semester anyways. Now fast forward a little more than a year. I finished my co-op and just finished my second to last semester. However, I became very ill. The kind of ill where the odds are against your survival. I had everything: a heart attack, several strokes, several amputations, stem cell surgery, the list goes on. It was caused by a rare autoimmune disease. I was in the hospital for the second or third time, all at least 3 weeks stays. She messaged me, and we began to talk again. She told me how I never deserved any of that, and that I was a nice person, and just made me feel better. I was always thanking her, because she really was my best friend through all of this. I would talk to her on my phone, even though I was so drugged up I know I made no sense. Seriously, all my friends talk about my weird random texts from that time. She would always tell me I don't owe her anything, even though I truly felt like I owed her my life for just being some kind of hope. Just the hope that maybe one day I would get better and be able to just see her and hold her one more time. I've had a hug at some point, I'm sure. Anyways, I asked her why she always felt so bad when I said I felt like I owed her anything, and she told me that she was really depressed at school and that talking to me just made her feel better about herself and life. Since I got sick she has gotten antidepressants and I think she is doing better, though all her friends are getting married, and that really messes with a girl's head, since she is still single. I know everyone reading this now is groaning. We still talk occasionally, but she lives some 9 hours or so away from me. I just finished my BS, and will probably attend graduate school soon, still trying to pull my life completely back together. I'm pretty sure the two of us have both been that person for each other, but she's over there, and I'm over here. We may not be that love story that ends up being a box office hit, but we were both there for each other when we needed the other, and I needed her as much or more than she needed me, and I was being a nice guy the entire time, so they don't always lose, unless you count everything else that happened to me. In that case, I was tortured worse than you can imagine. Seriously, more pain than you can conceive. I don't remember most of this. I mostly got it from what my mom told me about it. Details might be off or exaggerated, but not by me. When I was little, I was in the doctor's office for the regular checkup. I went to do the eye test. I read the chart okay with my left eye, covering my right. The nurse told me to switch, so I covered my right eye with my other hand and read the chart again. The nurse didn't notice. My mother, however, did, so she covered my left eye for me. As it turned out, I have an asymmetropic amblyopia. Basically, one eye is shit, but the other is fine. Your brain doesn't get this, so it just starts making your good eye shit too. If you catch it early, you can fix it with an eye patch and glasses. If not, your vision gets even worse. At the time we caught it for me, I was already legally blind. I can now legally drive without glasses. Now, my mom was a pediatrician herself. Apparently, not long after I cheated on the eye test, another patient in her practice tried the same thing. The nurse only noticed because my mom had noticed me doing it and told the nurses to be looking for it. From what she told me, they might not have noticed in time to do anything about it, and that girl would have grown up nearly blind. Instead, her vision is decent. I've never met her, but if what my mother told me is true, I had a pretty big impact. My grandma is still physically and mentally all here. However, my grandpa is bedridden, cannot see, and it is difficult for him to speak clearly. My grandma will tell me how she gets no sleep because she constantly checks on my grandpa through the night to make sure he is still alive. My grandpa has helpers that come to his house through hospice throughout the week. One night my parents had driven my grandma to my brother's place for dinner. My parents ended up needing to deal with the situation on the phone, and I knew my grandma had to relieve a helper by 10. Seeing it was almost 9:30, I told my GMA that whenever she needed a ride to let me know, and I would take her home. We left right after I told her. I walked her to her door and made sure she got in all right. The next day, when I went over to visit with my grandpa and sing with him, my grandma kept thanking me for taking her home. She started to cry and told me that I didn't have to take her, but that I made her feel like I wanted to, that when she goes out she still has to rely on a lot of people, and it makes her feel like a burden. Hearing her say these things, I started to tear up, as I'm doing now, looked her in the eyes and said, "Grandma, you are never a burden to me. You take care of grandpa all the time. Anytime I can help make your life a little bit easier or better, you need to know that I'm here any time of the day." Just by offering to take her home, I had shown something to her that I still don't quite understand. There are nights when I will call her just to say hey and how are you, and most nights it's fairly normal. Then there are nights that I call her and I can instantly tell that she just needed to hear someone ask her how she was, because her voice will crack just a little. It is through these moments that I'm constantly reminded that something that can seem like such a small gesture to you and literally means something so great to another human being. Also, I want to say to everyone who is writing in this thread that the world needs more people like you. I'm not including myself because I don't think like I'm the sheet ahabuot you guys are. Had a really good friend in high school who I took a lot of speed with during year 11th and 12. She had lost her mother to cancer at age 13. Family never spoke about it, and she was fairly vulnerable and messed up, etc. Taking speed seemed quite cathartic for her, as we had many all-night talks about losing her mother and family problems. Fairly sure I was with her the first time she really cried for the loss of her mum, 4 years after the fact. Prior to that, she told me she would punch herself to try and feel something about the loss of her mum. After high school, she moved up north and got heavily involved in the speed scene. We drifted apart and I moved on. Few years later, she was a recovering addict with Hep C. I reconnected with her on Facebook a year or so ago, and she sent me a message thanking me for saving her. She is now happily married with kids, etc. I had no idea what she was talking about. Apparently I had called her up during one particularly bad speed binge. She was in an abusive relationship with her speed dealer and her life was incredibly faked up. I then rang another mutual friend who had lost touch with this girl and expressed how bad I thought things were for this girl. The other friend rang up our speedhead friend and arranged for her to move back down and live with her and her family. From that point on, she got treatment and started a new life. In my mind, our other friend did the saving, but apparently it was my phone calls that set it all in motion. She believes that if I hadn't called her, then our other friend, she would be dead. TLDR, I apparently saved a speed addicted friend's life by gossiping. In high school I dated a girl my freshman year, but it didn't last long. The lead up, actual relationship and breakup lasted something like 3 months. The odd part, to me at the time, was that the relationship ended without any warning. We were fine on Friday, and on Monday she broke up me. I hadn't had much experience with relationships and just assumed this was how things went. Because of this, I wasn't bitter and still talked to her a good deal, similar to what we did before we dated for the short while we did. Fast forward 6 years, both of us are in college. She is a year older than me, and she is about to enter her last semester. We hadn't spoken much since she graduated high school because she went to university many hundreds of miles away, so it was a surprise when I randomly received message from her detailing why she broke up with me. Earlier I mentioned being fine one Friday and then things falling apart on the following Monday. During that weekend she had met up with an old crush who had moved away. He was back in town for the weekend and cheated on me. She already had a bit of a reputation at our school for getting around, so she hid the truth and made up some bull excuse about us growing apart. However, her parents found out about the cheating and lying and were not happy about it. It's wrong, first off, and secondly, they liked me. Her family, at this time, was also in the middle of moving because of her dad's work. All of these factors, her reputation, the cheating, the move, and other petty things weighed heavily her, and she considered suicide. Only learned of this from the years later message. Apparently the thing that stopped her from following her plan was that I treated her like a human being and kept talking to her even through the breakup. As of now she has graduated from college and is pursuing a graduate degree as psychology. TLDR, be nice to your exes. My senior year in high school, I decided to join choir. I'm generally a very happy-go-lucky person, and when I'm really happy, there is no telling how I will express it. Well, one time, my choir was singing the national anthem before one of our school's football games. I was anxious and excited because it was the first time I had done anything like that. There was a foreign exchange student from Mexico in my choir, let's call her Bella. Her English was very broken, but she loved music. As we were all standing around, I noticed her standing alone, so I went over there and laughed and hugged her saying how unbelievably cold it was. Just something random I would do to bring someone back into the group. Fast forward a few months, my conductor had entered me into a singing competition, so I stayed in at lunch to practice with him. Bella would always be in there sitting on the piano bench watching me sing with these huge eyes. It was really unnerving the way she stared at me, the way she acted around me. It seemed like she was in love with me. Being straight and not able to fully communicate with her, I tried to put distance between us. I honestly do know the difference of someone who just wants to be your friend and someone who has an attachment to you. So school was coming to an end and I get called into a counselor's office. I thought to myself, how weird. I don't know why I would be going in here while I frantically search my brain to see if I can think of something I had done wrong. As I open the door, I see the counselor there and across from her was Bella. I now assumed that I was going to be in trouble for not being her best friend. The counselor, let's call her Norma. Norma asks me if I know why I'm there. I look from her to Bella and shake my head. Norma then took the next 30 minutes to tell me why Bella was sent to the United States to go to school. In Mexico, she was raped by her uncle as a young girl and her parents didn't believe her when she tried to tell them after years of this. Then Norma proceeded to tell me that her parents thought she was lesbian because she never hung out with guys. No she didn't. She was scared of them. Norma then tells me that Bella has suffered from depression with cutting herself and even attempt suicide. This is where I came in. Bella had created a way to end her life the night I gave her that hug. She had written her suicide note and was going to go home after she sang and kill herself. Norma told me that when I hugged Bella, I gave her a purpose to live. I made her realize that there are people out there who are going to be there for you. I started feeling like an asshole then. This is why she acted the way she did towards me. I had given her that reason to live that night. Something that was so small to me meant so much more to her 4 years later. We still keep in touch every now and then. I see pictures of her on Facebook all of the time and she really does look happy. It's crazy to think that the smallest acts of kindness can do the biggest things. I'm not sure how much of an impact I had, but I think I helped a little with this girl I talked to online for an hour. First off, I'm a girl. And secondly, I live in the US. I was at work and just browsing online, and I had a bright idea to get on Omegle chat. I had been messing around, changing my gender, country and age to see if the person would disconnect or not. Unsurprisingly, lots of people disconnected when I'd use male. But anyways, I decided to use m/23/Ireland for this ASL and surprisingly the person didn't disconnect. I expressed my surprise and found out it was a female who found Irishman sexy. I totally abused the whole lass, girly thing. It was terrible. We chatted. I made up some BS story about how I was a bartender on break. She was all flirty and I decided to try to be a charming gentleman. During this, she kind of let it slip her boyfriend was never this nice to her, and I started questioning her a little. Just curious, you know. And she starts to detail it out, and it starts to sound like she was in an emotionally abusive relationship. She was having self-esteem problems, and he was just making it worse, to the point of her questioning her self-worth. So I started suggesting that she needed to talk to her friends and family and maybe even a counselor, if it was that bad. And I even insisted that she break up with him if he was as abusive as she was describing, all while using this fake Irishman persona. In the end, it came time to close for my job. I poured on more Irish charm, and before I clicked disconnect, she thanked me for listening to her problems, and that she was going to talk to her friends about it. I really hope she got some help. Probably too late with this, but I think it's a great story to share. I have a younger brother that works out a lot, and likes to take care of his body properly. But it hasn't always been this way. I think it was some 10 years ago, I had got a job for a day. It was unloading a ship by hand. Everything was 5 kilogram boxes, and every box had to be moved about 15 meters. As my younger brother could use the money, I offered him to help out. He had always been the nerdy type. No muscles whatsoever, pale and poor social skills. Just loved to sit around at home and play with his computers. He got to work, and it went okay for the first half hour or so. The cargo bay was full, so it took about 10 hours to empty it. After an hour he became tired, but I kept on pushing him because I had got him the job and he had to earn his money. But after 2 hours, he just couldn't work anymore. He was completely exhausted. I tried to give him something to eat and drink, but it didn't matter. He was not able to work more. I still remember him lying down and out of breath. I simply told him to relax and that I was going to do his bit of work. I was a bit angry that specific moment, but also felt pity for the poor boy. The end of it was that he got to sit down for the rest of the day while I worked for two. Just a couple of months ago, my father told me that that day was the turning point for my brother. That he was so incredibly ashamed of his effort and his miserable physique that he made himself a promise to get in shape, eat healthy and become social. He has kept the promise. Now he is muscular and healthy and a very outgoing person. I'm kind of proud that I was the reason that he developed in that direction. TLDR, my younger brother changed his whole life because of a job that I had to do for him. I moved to California to go to me in Hollywood. Met a girl on Match.com, we dated. She helped me get away from my terrible roommates. I couldn't find a job as a sound engineer, so we stopped dating and I moved back to Texas. Hadn't spoken in a year or two until I added her on Facebook. She resented me still, but finally got past it. Turns out she's moving to Houston for an internship, and I happen to be moving to Houston to work for the Texans. There's an MLS All-Star vs Manu game going on. We buy tickets in advance. She's supposed to come and meet my roommate, best bud, to expand her friend network. Turns out I got asked to work the soccer, football, game. So I got her to not bail and said come meet my friend Alvaro. He's a fun guy and you'll have fun, I promise. They had a good time. He asked me if it was cool, if they hung out, etc. It didn't bother me at all. A year later they got engaged and are super happy together, and they are one of those couples that are fun to be around and you can tell they're crazy in love with each other. They came home to celebrate with family and my best bud thanked me, as did his new fiancée, for introducing them. Never in my life have I felt so good about playing a part in the story of someone finding happiness. I doubt anything like that will happen again. TLR, I introduced my friend to his fiancée years after meeting her in California. Side story, my friend needed to find a purebred German Shepherd puppy, SP, a home, for free. I posted something on Facebook and my best bud Alvaro said that was the dog he's always wanted to have. I take down the post and turn down many offers that I got even for money in my pocket and gave the puppy to him. Technically I've helped him find his fiancée and his dream dog. Not sure how else I can hook this guy up, haha. Senior year in high school was rough for me. Over the summer before my senior year started, my neighbors, great family friends, got into a car accident and half the family died. The other half were severely injured. It was extremely traumatic to me because it was the first deaths I had dealt with on a personal level. My mother's parents had been moved into assisted living because my grandfather had Alzheimer's. In February, on Valentine's Day to be specific, my father left divorce papers on the kitchen table for my mother. They had been married 35 years and had 5 children together. He left them on the table and without telling me, had me drive him to the airport for business. A week and a half later, my grandfather with Alzheimer's passed away. I was in a peer leadership class in school, in which our teacher tried to teach us how to handle the problems our fellow students brought to us. One day, an emotionally exhausting day for me, after having listened to my parents scream at each other all morning, before leaving for school, the teacher called on me to be the subject. I had to come up with a problem for a fellow classmate to help me with. The usual was my friend smokes in my car and I want her to stop. What do I do? That kind of stuff. I told my teacher I couldn't think of anything. He asked me to think of what is bothering me at this moment. And boy did I completely unload on this poor unsuspecting kid sitting across from me. I told him everything. This was all sitting in front of the rest of the class. The kid sat in shock. He turned to the teacher and said, "I don't know what to tell her," to which the teacher looked clueless. Then the bell rings to end the period and we all rush to put our desks back where they belong. I don't feel any better. I still feel completely alone in a school filled with my peers. A guy I had gone to school with since first grade walks up to me, puts his hands on my desk, so I have to put it down. I look up at his face and he says, "I know we don't know each other that well, and I know we don't talk, but if you ever need anyone to talk to, I will always be there to listen." Then he smiled and walked out of the classroom. I never did talk to him about my issues, but knowing that someone who didn't really know me was willing to help me, it made the difference, and I was able to get through the rest of my school year. I ended running into him a few years later at a club. I told him exactly how much it had meant to me. I don't know if he remembered even saying it to me, but he smiled and said it was good to hear I was doing better. Then he walked away. To this day, his one act made all the difference. Actually, yay, a story comes to mind. I was a punk teenager in high school. I was one of those be an activist about everything types. Well, I had an English teacher that was a real piece of work. She would constantly change assignments and forget what she actually told us to do. 80% of the class was falling. One time I was sick and had a friend give me the assignment from her class so I could do it while I was at home. I brought it in 2 days later when I was feeling better and apparently she changed the assignment the day before. She wouldn't let me redo it and gave me a 0. Not only that, but everyone that didn't do the assignment as it was changed had to stand up in front of the class and give an apology for wasting the teacher's time. Instead of giving an apology, I gave a speech about how high school and how much pressure we are under to fit in and be other people's expectation of success. I went on about how beautiful it is to be unique and not be afraid to express yourself. If people hate you for who you really are, it is still better than them loving who you are not. Anyway, about 6 years later I ran into a guy I didn't even recognize at first. He was the popular guy at school who was the typical football player dating the hot girl cheerleader. He instantly came up to me and gave me a hug. He was almost in tears telling me how that speech in English class changed his life and gave him the courage to come out of the closet. Had no clue. Apparently I also told him you can do better after his girlfriend started bawling from getting Elmer's glue on her fake nails. Felt good, man. My junior year of high school, I started hanging out with some guys I knew from marching band. I ended up becoming pretty good friends with one of them, which surprised a lot of people. He was a lot more popular than I was. Outside of band, I was into sport, and he was a singer in a metal band. But we found that we got along really well, and had an easy time understanding each other. We were both pretty good at GoldenEye, and could play for hours. His parents had divorced when he was really young. He had a very poor relationship with his dad and barely saw his mom, who worked all the time. So he basically had been left on his own for years. My parents are still together and were very involved in my life. They came to my competitions and games. We had meal together all time, etc. My friend began to join us more and more often. The other odd thing about us becoming friends is that I'm a Christian and him, an atheist. My dad is a pastor and language scholar with his PhD from Harvard. My mom went to Harvard as well. And no, this isn't a story of me showing him that he needed religion. So from our families to most of our interests, we had a lot of differences. I'm giving all this backstory to show how different we were, and the odds that we would be friends rather slim. What I never knew was that when we had started hanging out and became friends, he was thinking about suicide. He had felt abandoned by his parents for years and just come to hate his life. After high school I went off to college and then moved to the other side of the country. I saw him occasionally while I was in college and then lost contact with him after I moved. 10 years after we graduated high school, my sister runs into him. They start talking and he asks her to thank me and our family. He told her that our family gave him a completely different perspective on Christians as we never tried to push the Bible on him or tell him he was going to hell. There are a lot of religious idiots where I grew up in the Midwest that have a very demented view of the Bible. He told her that he had never known with his family what it was like to have people care about you for no reason and accept him as he was. My sister called me and told me that he just told her that my being friends with him and getting to know our family is what changed his mind about committing suicide. I never had a clue. TLR, you never know what someone is going through. You might never know the extent by friendship can change someone's life. This is a long story and it's going to get buried at this point, but it's something I still think of till this day. This probably won't make me look very good, but back when I was around 14, after my mother dealt with a trying divorce, she kind of became crazy religious. I had never found interest in religion, but because of the things we both dealt with, I attended church and didn't start arguments. One of those, if it's what she needed, I wasn't going to fuck with it, kind of thing. Well, fast forward a bit, and she had started taking me to the youth group meetings. I was a pretty extroverted kid. I did theater and whatnot, and had aspirations of acting, and managed to make as good of friends with the small group as I could, while finding their beliefs ridiculous. This is also where I began to act as a Christian around them, and essentially created a separate personality to deal with the church folk. That was all probably well and good, until the youth leader began having me lead sessions, volunteer to lead trips, etc. I was a bit older than the rest of the kids, so I became the de facto older kid to be looked up to. I know it's awful, but I pretty much kept up my Christian personality pretense and even began to help organize a larger youth program to bring in younger kids. I was essentially helping brainwash kids, knowing exactly what I was doing. This came to a head when I was asked to organize a youth lead Sunday service and do the sermon. I worked hours and hours on the sermon, treating as a monologue for a character I was playing. The service came and everyone seemed really into this speech. Afterwards, I was greeting the congregation and shaking hands and such, and this woman I'd never met came running up to me crying, hugged me and left the church. No one knew who she was or where she'd come from. That summer I went to college and dropped all connection to the church, told mums I was an atheist, finally, and managed to not feel too terribly bad about essentially helping brainwash kids into religion. It apparently ended up really hurting the church with my coming out, and the youth disbanded, and now the church is small and only has 20 to 30 members, most of which are fairly old. Cut to my junior year in college, when my mom calls asking if I remember the service I did for church and the woman we could never find out about. Apparently mom had recognized her in the paper in a lifestyle article. This woman had been a drug addict and homeless, but at some random point put herself in rehab, fixed her sheet, got her kids back, and had started a woman's shelter in my old town. She was now married and seemed to have really got her sheet together. In the article/interview she was asked what changed her, and she mentioned waking up one morning near a church, and just going in, and hearing a sermon, and it made her fix her life. I had no idea whatsoever that my immature and slightly sociopathic behavior had actually managed to do something decent. I may not agree with religion, but it certainly got this woman to pull her sheet together, and through some random coincidence, I was part of that reason. It's always reminded me of how random and connected people's lives can be, and has helped me in recent past to understand people and be more tolerant. Life be crazy. TLDR stupid high school self masqueraded in church as a hidden atheist, somehow managed to better someone's life and stop being a tool. This is a reverse one that I haven't told anyone yet, so here goes. Throughout my teenage and early 20s I dealt with a lot of depression, self-injury and suicidal tendencies, saw a lot of counselors, and tried a lot of differently anti-depression and anti-anxiety drugs, with no avail. I went off to college without meds, and tried to power through it, but instead started to spiral downwards. I got into partying, and that started turning into alcoholism as I spent more time getting drunk alone, watching TV in my dorm, and usually ending up injuring. My grades started to greatly suffer because of this, and I was on the quick path to failing out. One night I was really down and out, with my normal routine getting worse and worse, but then a sort of friend messaged me on my computer asking me to join him with some of his friends I had never met for a movie. I wasn't going to go, since I was feeling antisocial, and I had my evening planned out, but he insisted, even coming over or getting me. I ended up having an amazing time with these people, and making great friends with them. Most of them are still good friends to this day, with one of them being my husband. I stopped drinking almost completely, stopped self-injury and started trying in school again. I ended up graduating with a 3.0, great considering what I was working with, and having a successful career. I still haven't told him how he changed my life. He thinks we just went to a movie. Okay Reddit, you get the story about my ex-roommate who randomly showed up at my house on acid to complain I had become her in a voice of conscience, and had faked her for life with a lecture I gave her a year prior. Oh yeah, and on top of being strung out on acid, she was pregnant. I had a female roommate for a while over a few years ago, and she lived in the room next to me. When she first moved in she had 3 jobs, working towards a teacher license, going to school, and had her boyfriend from high school hanging around. So a year or so passes of us being mutual friends, and me not being around her all the time due to her boyfriend, let's call him R, giving me weird vibes when she would leave for just a minute. My hunch was later right. After a while she started having problems with R and finally broke up with him due to his cheating and excessive possessiveness. I was happy for her and supportive as a friend, since she said he did not give her any freedom since high school, and she was now 21. But as time went on with her newfound freedom, I noticed things here and there, such as her new boyfriend showing up at the house before the breakup was official. She quit 2 of her jobs and started playing around with art and stuff she wanted to do more, ignoring responsibilities. She rebounded to this new boyfriend, told him she loved him after only a month, and would use Plan B as her birth control until he had enough of her stupidity. After he broke up with her, she lost all faking control. She started to become a compulsive liar, to appear smarter or cooler in some people's eyes. The house we rent out from my parents has strict rules about house guests, and she started bringing over guys all the time to be surrounded by being wanted. She started dating 2 of my guy friends at the same time and getting pissed when I said it was slutty behavior. It was to the point where I seriously wasn't sure if she was trying to ruin her reputation or just being childish. She would even start saying shit, like I want to get pregnant, and I don't need a father for my kid, I'll raise it by myself. She would show up to parties, dressed as a faking Care Bear, and when people were like what the fuck, she would respond I'm just being me. No beach, you just crazy. Now about this time, I had the bright idea of trying to raise a puppy with her, to try to instill some of the base responsibility instincts back, and to see if she could even faking handle a human baby. We did it evenly for a while, and then she started ignoring responsibilities again, so I'd have the puppy in my room all night, and then she would come home in the morning and try to lie to me that she had the puppy with her all night. When I would call her out on these lies and trying to ignore the dog, she started to refuse to give the dog to me and insist she could take care of it by herself. I finally got sick of it and demanded my half of the money I paid for the dog so she could take the damn puppy and get the fuck out of my life. This bitch then starts making plans to move out without paying me back. So I scare her with a white lie that I had the dog licensed to me in the city and I would take her to small claims court and make her pay even more than she owed me. That did it, and she came back to the house to just try to parade some sort of charade of pride that she was still better than me and to make me sign a piece of faking binder paper saying that the puppy was hers. My friend were there to support me and call her out on her stupidity, and her new boyfriend was there too, who didn't like me when I warned him that she was no ready for a relationship. If he really cared for her, he was a loser who wanted bussy, and she gave it to him since he gave her the most attention. I tried to explain to the dumb cunt that she just needed to hand over the money and the dog was hers, but she insisted. Everyone watching was groaning at how stupid she was, and even her new boyfriend had nothing to say to defend this. After signing the stupid thing, I finally broke it to her that I had lied to get her to pay and that she was stupid for forcing me to do that to have her pay me back when she used to be my friend. I proceed to lecture her on how she ruined her reputation among our friends so badly that no one in our group wanted to hang out anymore. How she would tell me to fuck off when I was giving her honest advice as a friend because I cared, and it hurt me to have to say all this shit like a mom to her because she didn't care enough about herself to prevent it or see that I was a true friend to say shit that no one else would to actually help her. Not be seen as crazy. I yelled at her how she would blame me for her reputation going to shit when I was actually the only real friend to her trying to save her from that and not take responsibility for her own actions. I was appalled that she couldn't do something like this and was a faking elementary school teacher. And at times, she would pull the race card on me too, like oh you're saying that because I'm black. Which pissed me off to no end because that had nothing to do with her childish behavior. I literally tore her tenuous holes right in front of everyone, and her boyfriend had nothing to say to defend her against any of it because it was all true. I basically told her our friendship was so over, she would never see anyone in our group again. She left in a huff, with nothing to say to me. This was the last I saw of her. For a long time, we just referred to her as the crazy black chick. Until last Friday. She shows up out of nowhere in the morning, waking up my brother from half sleep. He rents out in my house too, and he wakes me up with a concerned, "Is here to see you." I don't know faking why. It's been over a year since we even talked to contacted her, so I'm wondering what the fact too. I'm curious. I go downstairs and she instantly grabs me and start chanting in my ear, "Will you listen now? Will you listen now?" I'm shocked by the sudden visit, so I don't know how to react to this other than what, "Why are you here? And what's going on?" She pulls back from me and I see her face for the first time in a year and her eyes are black. She is on something and waving a jewelry box around. In my head, oh fuck me, now I have to deal with crazy on something now? So I start listening to her rant about how I'd deeply affected her mind with that lecture to the point where I'd become her in a voice of conscience. When she was doing something she knew was wrong, she would hear me yelling at her to stop being a fuck up woman. The reason why she was there that day was because it was the anniversary of the day I'd chewed her out. What the fuck? She lost all of her friends after the fight and realized that in the end, it was her fault. That everyone else was just watching her fuck herself up and that I cared enough to tell her so. She was just hysterical about losing me and adamant that I come back into her life, even though her boyfriend, same guy, thought I was the devil. Or in other words, I would give her enough of a brain to give her sense that she could get a better guy than him. So then she goes on to tell me that she's pregnant. Her boyfriend asked her to marry him. She's wearing her ring, but she had the box with his ring. To me, that meant the deal wasn't sealed yet. And not to mention, she told me that it was my fault again for the fights in their relationship recently because she randomly wanted me to become her friend again without my consent. So she told me the reason why she had her boyfriend/fiance's ring is because she was going to tell him after she left my house that she wanted me back and some shit about how her right knee was for me and her left knee was for him. She then goes on to say, oh, he gave me acid and it made me into you. Great. He faking gave her acid. Oh, and did I mention she was pregnant? So now that I know she's been/is on right now/taking acid, I can see the sporadic reasoning and the why of this visit. I've taken it myself once, and having a epiphany can be the biggest and most emotional thing when it takes hold. But no one should have ever given this crazy bitch acid. She can't handle it, like she was proving at the moment. Since she was rambling on and on about fixing her Kai, and fixing my Kai with her, and fixing everyone in the world. She was gonna go to all of her ex-boyfriends, my guy friends, and burn old stuff they had of her, so she would feel right, etc. And being unable to take no for an answer, she would just get hysterical, until I brought her back to her line of reasoning at the moment. This is long, so I have to do multiple comments. My grandmother passed away 5 years ago when I was in high school, and for the last few years of her life, she was confined to her bed at my aunt's home or at the hospital and was starting to not be able to remember much stuff anymore. Anyway, I only got to see her a few times during those last few years because she lived in Japan. I'm from California. I didn't particularly enjoy those visits because I wasn't particularly close to her and I didn't know what kinds of things old bedridden people like to talk about. Anyway, the first time I visited her in my hospital was the summer before I started high school and I didn't think it was anything special. I didn't have much fun because I didn't feel like going to Japan that much in the first place that summer. Fast forward maybe 6 months, my dad came back from a business trip to Japan, which he did and still does fairly often. During that business trip, he went to visit my grandmother. He was talking about how her memory was fading and mentioned that between that visit and the visit before that, she remembers absolutely nothing except that I visited her. At the time my dad told me this, I didn't think too much about it, but nowadays, this leaves a rather deep impression on me. In a way, it makes me glad that my visit meant so much to her. But in a way, it also makes me sad. Those last few years weren't exactly the happiest. My uncle and aunt, different from the one I mentioned in the beginning who was much more caring. Also, the latter as the in-law, were generally mean to her and showed no love. Since realizing how much of an as they were to her, I felt a bit bitter toward them. When I think about this, I miss my grandmother quite a bit and wish I was a lot closer to her. I keep remembering how loving she was to me whenever I stayed in Japan during my summers as a little kid. A little late to this, but whatever. It may not seem that powerful, but it means a lot to me. Growing up, my cousins and I were always close. I have 19 cousins on one side, and we're all like siblings. 2 years ago, I was severely depressed, self-harming every day, and I attempted suicide twice. When a good friend of mine committed suicide, it brought me to rock bottom and I realized I needed help. I'm doing much better now, and I'm a generally happy person, though my own experiences with depression has affected me and the way I view myself and other people. Well, last year, my cousin was going through a real rough time. She's my age, and we are really close. She was going through a nasty breakup with an older guy. She was being bullied at school, and I think I was the only person who fully recognized her depression. One night, she told me how much she hated herself and her life, and I knew it was a bad sign. As the conversation was dying down, she was saying goodbye in a way that sounded too final for a conversation over text. So I trusted my instincts, notified her parents. They didn't take it seriously, and then called her to tell her how much I loved her, all my favorite things about her, and how important she actually was to me. I even made her a mixtape of feel-good music. We were on the phone for 11 hours that night. She never outright said she was suicidal, but I just had that feeling that something was wrong. After that night, she started to get a bit stronger every day, to the point where we kinda grew apart because she had a new sort of independence. 6 months after all this happened, I got a phone call from her. I was right. The night that I called her was the night she was going to kill herself. She'd already had the noose tied. All she had left to do was say goodbye to me. But I knew what was up, to an extent, and talked her out of it. TLDR cousin seems suicidal. I recognize the signs from my own experience, and talked to her all night, to make her feel better. Find out 6 months later that had I not stayed up all night with her, she would have hung herself. She's much better now. Moral of the story, if something doesn't seem right, don't write it off. I just had a very nice conversation with somebody regarding this very recently. He'd worked at a company where I was the contracted support person. When I used to make visits later in the afternoon, his high school aged son would usually be hanging around. As I was doing my thing, he would hang out with me and ask questions. Eventually, I let him start helping me. Over time, I basically taught him about firewalls, network basics, FTP server configurations, pretty much anything I was there to fix. I eventually lost that client. They hit hard times and didn't have money to spend on it anymore, and I lost touch with the guy and his son. That was all about 8 years ago now. Just last month I ran into the father in town. He told me that after I'd sparked his son's interest in it, he'd gone on to college and majored in programming and art/design. Now he was making tons of money as a group leader in a game design company. His father wanted to make sure I knew what an influence I'd been on his son's life. I've done quite a bit in my life, but knowing that I'd had this influence on his son's life still makes me proud whenever I think of it. Story 2. I have a cousin that is 10 years younger than me. When they were visiting once, and I was looking after him, I said sheet when I dropped something. He, being about 3 years old at the time, had no idea what swearing was, and I knew I'd be in a ton of trouble if my, or his, parents found out I'd sworn in front of him. I thought I'd finally convinced him to not tell anybody, but being only 3 he wasn't able to stay quiet. Fortunately, being 3, he also wasn't quite able to remember the words sheet and swear. So while he did go to his parents with questions, thankfully they didn't know what the hell he was talking about when he kept asking them if skid is a square. Fast forward and now he is a US Marine. I'm sure he knows more than sheet now. TLDR, I taught a Marine how to swear. Late to the party, and mine is a little more sad than positive, but here we go. I grew up with this girl for most of my childhood. Our fathers were almost best friends. They stopped hanging out suddenly, and I maybe saw this girl once every 8 or 9 months if that. Our interests were almost identical, and we got along wonderfully. One day last year, my father gets a call from her dad stating that the girl had overdosed on heroin. I'm shocked to hear this. She ends up surviving only to overdose again 2 weeks later and dying. At this point, I hadn't seen her in a couple of years. Fast forward to her funeral. I'm sitting there along with everyone else, stonner-faced, as I, for some reason, can't cry at funerals. A slideshow of pictures plays on the monitors at the funeral home, and to my dismay, appear in several of them. Later I flip through a scrapbook she's been holding on to / adding stuff to for the past 5 or 6 years. I have never had such an eerie feeling as I looked at the pages that mentioned me. Especially the one that had a little note saying how much she missed me and that she wishes I would come around more. My heart sank. I then found out by her father that we attended the same college at the same time. I could have walked past her hundreds of times and never even noticed. We could have even been in the same classes. I don't really talk to people at school. I doubt I would have recognized her seeing as how she changed her hair color constantly. I, on the other hand, was still the tall skinny redhead she used to know. It just hit me hard that there was a possibility that I could have been the one to help her when she needed it. The fact that I was mentioned in a recent scrapbook entry when I hadn't seen her for a couple years. Saddest day of my life.